A very good morning or evening to all of you, to whatever time zones you're in. I welcome you to the seminar of energy transition, which has been, is being organized with the objective to project and highlight the adoption of technology and energy transition, uh, talking about the collaborative approach and business models prevalent. So to introduce myself, I am Anamika Das. Uh, and I'm the Vice President for the Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Project with Geospatial World. And I would be conducting this entire seminar in terms of giving you an overview about the sector and giving a kind of setting the tone for this entire seminar. So in the past decade, has established a strong initial momentum to transform the energy systems for the decades ahead, and the scaling of nascent technologies and an increased focus on climate change have fixed the global attention firmly on the decarbonization of the energy systems. And this journey, I would say, is far from over, as in 2019, approximately 81% of the world's energy was still supplied by fossil fuels, and global greenhouse emissions rose through 2020, and more than 770 million people around the world still lack access of electricity. So the transformation of our energy systems needs to increase its momentum to help achieve critical objectives such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Agreement that we have heard of. And all these things, a base lies on the technology adoption and how the technology is being used in the sector. So can we go to the next slide, Disha? So the energy market is changing. New policies, technologies, sources, all are promoting us to embark on a long journey towards the new world of an energy transition and to achieve a kind of sustainable consumption model and solution to tackle global warming and the climate change. So there are a few mega trends that we see in this sector. So digital revolution, a new mode of, which is a kind of new mode of interaction between machine, man, and data, which we also call it as fourth industrial revolution. And thanks to the increasingly wide availability of the digital information and the ability to process it, improving and partly automating many management processes and the decision-making processes. The second mega trend is energy security. Indeed, the reason behind decisions that promote a wider use of renewable often includes greater, energy security provided by these energy sources. And since they are available almost everywhere, unlike the non-renewable resources like oil and natural gas, which create a kind of dependence on import in countries which have little or no domestic resources. The third mega trend is of spread of mass transportation of people and good. And in the coming year, this will have a kind of large impact on world's overall energy need, and particularly on the demand for the sources that are economical and easy to use in the transport sector based on the technology and the infrastructure available for that. The fourth mega trend consists of the need of reduced pollutant emission with local impact caused by production and the use of energy sources. And this key mega trend has already been, guiding the energy system drivers from many decades, particularly for the large industrial plants and the motor vehicles. And on the subject of the mega trends that will drive the evolution of the energy system, the three more trends that we are experiencing or looking at are mitigation of the climate change phenomena, universal access to energy, and the population growth. All these are also one of the trends that is going to impact the entire energy sector. Can we go to the next slide, please? So with energy transition at peak, challenges arises as entities seek a kind of way to cope with the rising demand. And one possible solution that can come in handy is the utilization and adoption of geospatial technologies. And given these trends in the transmission and the distribution, company needs to invest in considerable, modification of the energy infrastructure. And geospatial have a huge potential for contributing to the necessary geospatial analysis and the decision support, apart from what we look at, geospatial sometimes only as a visualization tool, but it is much beyond that. So as energy authorities prioritize the sustainable energy strategies, geospatial would fuel advances in location-based scientific analysis, in identifying sites for maximum energy potential or optimizing economic development, while minimizing the environmental impact. So it's being empowered by science-based insight that will ensure energy efficiency, greater energy security, and resilient and green building for the better quality of life. Can we go to the next slide? Coming to the technologies that are driving this new wave of energy transition, that from the rollout of intelligent machinery to the industrial deployment of UAVs, the world is undergoing a fundamental transformation that is creating new possibilities. Technologies once confined to the realm of science fiction is now becoming an integral part of the life. And for the energy industry, these technologies can help achieve breakthrough in efficiency, safety, and also reducing carbon emissions. We also have an ever-present desire to achieve further sustainability gains, and these factors are inspired by a new wave of technological development within the energy sector itself. Just for an example, oil and gas companies are deploying 4IR solutions across its operations, from subsurface exploration to the downstream development, to improve their efficiency and reduce emission, enhance reliability and optimize cost, and unlock even new opportunities for that matter. So the sites equipped with this industrial IoT, what we say, devices, industrial IoT devices, and the digital twin technology, which enables remote operations using real-time 3D virtual reality softwares, harnessing this big data analytics, machine learning, smart sensors that we see, and you know, many dependent on the forecast systems. So these industrial robotics and UAVs, they perform inspection functions, improving diagnostic capabilities and efficiency. So these technologies have helped to ensure uninterrupted production even throughout the COVID-19 pandemic that we have recently experienced. So, and for the fact of the matter, we are still in this phase. So it has also revolutionized the job without replacing them. So before this digital transformation, most plants and field operations activities, they required physical human intervention, with process modification and enhancement determined by this individual experts. But now operators make decisions based on information obtained from this real-time industrial IoT controlling systems. So by optimizing its operations, they can, play a key role in advancing the clean energy transition. Can we go to the next slide? So we are seeing this new world emerging in which people are not just connected with other people, but to the object or to the workflow or the business partners and infrastructure, all powered by data, which demands a kind of smarter approach to not only data management, but also data sharing as well. So this is very key to understand that uh, um, this will be a key to succeed in the energy transition progress, as this will ensure developing innovative solutions for managing the assets, optimizing performance of non-renewables. So data sharing as well as data, management would be key for it. And to add to that, building data ecosystem in energy and utilities would be key, because sharing data in a fair and trusted way can be a very powerful, medium or mechanism for bringing a strategic change in attitude towards data ownership and value. And sometimes this is also called, data equity in common terms. So this data equity is established when members of the business ecosystem shareholding interests in, collective value of this data rather than just disparate data sets. So um, such interests are represented and managed in a kind of, equitable and trustworthy manner. So data sharing is nothing new that we know, but then looking at the level of not only within the organization, but the sharing at the national level, which will also be key. And this will actually bring in the two-way value or for the organization as well as for the nation's good in terms of we will the organization will have the data from the repository at the national level at the real time, for their analysis as well, and they can superimpose different kinds of data from that repository. To the next slide. So what lies ahead is when talking about data sharing at all levels within organization, inter-organization, and with national infrastructure, what lies ahead is walking from the knowledge to data services. And there are few trends that is undergoing in the geospatial segment wherein organizations are looking at knowledge on demand. And to generate this, an ecosystem approach is required, wherein not only the energy but other ecosystem that is there, like geospatial ecosystem, 4IR ecosystem, another industry ecosystem. So that kind of approach of having a kind of interacting with each other is required, and this is where the national geospatial infrastructure can be kind of driven towards providing knowledge services. So can we go to the next slide? So with this video, I would just give an update on the background about the knowledge infrastructure that I have been talking about.
The fourth industrial revolution and allied technologies like big data, artificial intelligence, 5G, advanced robotics, miniaturization, etc. are driving new behaviors, collaborations, and policies, thereby leading to unprecedented social changes. The digital ecosystem is evolving by integrating a variety of data sources, including real-time data, improved analytical capabilities, and by moving from data to knowledge services to solve real-world challenges. The evolving digital ecosystem challenges the geospatial sector to transition into the 4IR era and raises the need for a next-generation geospatial infrastructure that embraces automation, dynamicity, and real-time delivery of knowledge. Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure, or GKI, aims to provide the critical geospatial component to knowledge and automation, and thereby position geospatial, a general-purpose technology, at the heart of 4IR and knowledge economy. It encompasses data, technology, policy, and people to ensure smooth provision and use of geospatial intelligence and knowledge to the broader ecosystem. GKI strives to ensure geospatial is everyone's business by developing a next-generation interconnected platform wherein geospatial data from different disciplines, formats, and organizations are integrated in an organized and usable manner, thereby developing a geospatial-enabled decision support system.
Well, so what I was talking was elaborating on the trends in the energy transition sector. And we as a geospatial world have collaborated with the United Nations Statistics Division and a host of organizations to understand and project the value proposition of geospatial knowledge for various economic sectors, as well as to understand how this entire national geospatial infrastructure can be taken up a stage forward towards not only delivering a data product but also a kind of knowledge services. And this project is a kind of 3-year project wherein we are currently in the second year phase of the project, talking about the technology adoption as well as the value proposition for the user segment. So we have selected 8 user segments, and one of this is actually is energy transition. And this entire concept is talking about from the industry side, innovation, technology integration, geospatial for 4IR, application, analytics, and modeling. And from the user side, it's focused on data integration and enhancing to the geospatial knowledge services. And from the government side, it talks about the fundamental data and integrated policy, which is enriching data ecosystem, enhancing the value proposition, as well as integrating data for the national good, and also talks about the collaboration and partnerships among the stakeholders. And with this background, I will hand over the floor to John Kedar, the Strategic Advisor, Geospatial Infrastructure with Geospatial World, who will run us through the concept of geospatial knowledge infrastructure and its relevance for the energy transition. So the floor is yours, John.
Thank you very much, Anamika, and I'll get my presentation up on screen. Here we go. Good. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and Anamika, thank you as well for going through so much at the beginning of the presentation there, because I think it sort of helps set the scene. And what I'll do is I'll whip through a couple of things a bit faster as a result of what you've talked about. Anamika mentioned the geospatial knowledge infrastructure project's been going now for, gosh, nigh on 2 years, actually, delayed slightly with COVID. And we've been doing some great things during this, including running the first ever GKI, Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure course, at the Geospatial World Forum, or just before the Geospatial World Forum back in October. But it is a coalition of different organizations that are trying to understand what's next for geospatial. And in a sense, we can't talk about what's next for geospatial without talking to the users, the people that, and the organizations and the businesses, and indeed the governments that are making use of geospatial in all its forms to support economic benefits, business benefits, social benefits, and societal benefits, and so on. And that's absolutely what we're doing this year. But I'd also make the point with this geospatial knowledge infrastructure is it's not fixed. This isn't an answer. This is not some blueprint for an infrastructure where you can take it away and just use it. We're developing the concept. And during the first year, we developed a white paper, which is what I'm going to talk to you about, with stakeholders from across the world to try and start thinking about what the future geospatial infrastructure looks like. And it very much is in that space of knowledge, which I'll explain shortly, rather than just data. And I think this is really important because in a sense, it's knowledge where the value really lies. Anyway, we'll see more of that as I go through. But the third year of the project, which will start sometime in 2022, will go back into governments and we'll start talking to the government digital elements as opposed to geospatial elements, and try and join the dots a little bit between geospatial and the digital environment, as so many companies and so many government agencies are trying to do in their respective countries. Our world is changing, and these pictures will look very familiar, but geospatial is forming part of just about everything that we do in some shape or form. The number of Earth observation satellites of different types in space now is absolutely phenomenal. The applications on our smartphones, the processing power, the way the web is developing, and of course, sensors absolutely everywhere are changing the very geospatial world that we have grown up in, most of us. And the users are changing too. And I think, in a sense, we well recognize that new sectors are making use of geospatial technologies and data and so on. The finance sector being a classic example of trying to predict um, the shortages in oil, for example, or grain, in order to make profit. These are geospatial technologies contributing to that knowledge in the finance sector. Uh, and of course, most importantly, I think of all, is automation. The user is no longer just a human being at the end of it, where a human actually makes the decision in many cases. But automation is changing the user community too. And we've seen increasingly, and already see, automated vehicles on the streets, autonomous vehicles on the streets, and much other automation besides. And I think the sort of drone environment in cities, the 3D environment for drones, is going to be yet another area where we're going to see increasing autonomy over the next few years. And that means geospatial is not just being used by humans, but it's being used by machines without any human in the loop, except perhaps at the programming stage. So why else a new concept? Well, geospatial is changing in the sense of the businesses. So this is just a random, really, selection of businesses. Um, but they are all in some shape or form, to a greater or lesser degree, geospatial companies without realizing it. They don't really recognize a geospatial sector, as we like to talk about. It's just data, it's just analytics, it's user interfaces, etc., in which location plays a greater or lesser part. And I think this is really important for us to realize. Many of us have grown up in a world in geospatial businesses where we've seen ourselves as something different, something special. Well, we're not. We're just part of a much wider environment, a much wider digital environment, where location is increasingly playing a part. And today we're looking at one particular sector to start to understand that, to help develop our thinking with this particular project. And I could use any slide here, but there are many types of data. We know that, vast numbers of data. That volume of data, as we know, is quadrupling, and quadrupling every 5 years. But more to the point, we're starting to see value put on data, value put on data in businesses. And you've only got to look at Alphabet to see how Alphabet is valued, to recognize how much of that company's value is based on its data holdings. But actually, data has no value unless it's used to solve a problem. And that's where the modeling, the applications community, and increasingly AI, together with location, come together to help make use of this vast amount of data, to help integrate it, to help bring it to something that enables services, decisions, etc., etc. And yes, let's go there. And in a sense, I think many of you be familiar with this pyramid, which starts with data at the bottom and wisdom at the top. And it's a very familiar pyramid, and it's really about value within the information environment. And we've been very good in the past at dealing with data and information, and indeed, automatically generating information about what, where, when. But the reality is, our problems aren't about what, where, when. They're about the whys and the hows, and they're about prediction. And we've got to move into this world of knowledge in order to predict. And of course, that's where the value of what we do increases. And geospatial technologies and geospatial data is all part of this pyramid in heading towards knowledge and ultimately wisdom. And Anamika talked about knowledge on demand, which of course is something we all think about increasingly. We turn to our smart devices to try and learn about something, to gather some sort of understanding that helps us make decisions. And at the moment, most spatial data is hidden from that contribution to that knowledge on demand. Just in a sense through the technologies we use and that which we have developed so far. But moves are being made to ensure that our data is increasingly available in that environment. And in a sense, the digital journey, and I'm old enough to remember paper and desk phones and typing pools, but the digital road has been fast and it's been improving. And many of you will have grown up at the right-hand end of this particular scale. And at the same time, the geospatial world has moved enormously as well. There's no doubt about it. In a lifetime, we have moved a tremendous distance. And the United Nations now is helping promote integrated geospatial information management to all countries around the world. And this project, as Anamika said, is a partnership with the United Nations Statistics Division, because at the end of the day, we are trying to support the development of geospatial capabilities in all nations. So we've had these two, but notice that they are largely apart. But the advent of what I think is the greatest open geospatial contribution to society, GNSS, it really has, to use that cliched phrase, democratized location. GNSS is and the chips are just in so much of what we do, our smartphones, our cars, increasingly in the Internet of Things. And that by necessity, therefore, means that there are no longer a geospatial path and a digital path. They are and have to be together, and that's really where we're positioning GKI. What is the next step? And it is about linking those two paths, amongst other things. And I would, those in the geospatial community will know Jack Dangerman well. And he is looking for what the next step is too. He's saying exactly the same things, and that's why he has joined, or rather, his organisation has joined this project. What is it we've got to do in the future? In a sense, spatial data infrastructures which have been going for decades now, were aiming to solve a problem of the time. And in a sense, much of our geospatial community is still thinking in that environment. But actually, as many in the audience will understand, what we're really in now is a very different geospatial environment, where our data has got to be fit for real off the quick and speedy analytics, where we're looking at not just 3D, but 4D and even 5D. And for me, that 5D is about probability. 4D is pretty obvious. We've got to think about our ecosystem being, everyone who is a user of, for example, smartphone applications are effectively users of geospatial technology. So the geospatial knowledge infrastructure is trying to move to the right-hand side here. And in a sense, you'll see some very familiar cries in there around predictive, around on-the-fly data analysis, and so on and so forth. That's what we're trying to get to. And there's a lot of work being done in many places to achieve that, absolutely. Okay, so in thinking about the geospatial knowledge infrastructure, we came up with this vision, geospatial knowledge at the heart of tomorrow's global digital society. And I think That's the important point, at the heart of tomorrow's global digital society. And the definition follows that through a little bit further. And it talks very much, as you can see, about what we're trying to achieve with GKI. And there's a lot of disruption at the moment, and in a sense, this definition tries to capture the view that this is going to keep changing. We're not trying to set up some sort of rigid, hardwired infrastructure here. We're talking about a continuously evolving environment, and that leads us into the principles. Single digital ecosystem, I think I've talked about enough. Knowledge being the focus. That's what we're striving for. It's higher up the value chain. Insight, which we get now, to foresight. Very much led by users, understanding our user communities. What is the knowledge they seek, rather than what's the data and applications available. Taking achievable actions now. No one is saying that everything can be done at once. And in different nations and in different industries, it's a matter of, well, what's right? What's the priority? Let's do something that we can achieve today, and then scale. Agility, which I talked about on the last slide. The world is going to keep changing, and we have to, and our solutions have to change with that world. Decentralized, just like the web is, and collaborative. And I'll talk a bit more about collaboration shortly, because the more and more that we all work in this business, the more and more we realize that collaborations are what takes the business forward. So the geospatial knowledge infrastructure has 6 elements, if you like, and we'll just talk through those in a second. But what I want to stress here is it's around governments, it's around industry, and it's around that wider digital ecosystem and the infrastructure along with that digital ecosystem. Much of what the geospatial community has focused on in recent years, with the United Nations emphasis on the integrated geospatial information framework, has been very much at the sort of government foundation data end. What the United Nations Statistics Division sees as exciting by being involved in this particular project, in fact, setting it up, is the fact that we start to talk much more broadly with industry and the wider digital environment. So there are 6 elements. Integrated policy framework is the first one. And this doesn't just apply to digital. To me, there is little point having a digital policy framework and a geospatial policy framework if the two aren't integrated in some shape or form. And there are many other examples we could cite. Everything from you can have a national space strategy, of course you can, that's great. But what about the data that you're getting? What are you going to do with it? How's that going to benefit society? And how is that integrated into your space policy? So in a sense, integrated policy sounds obvious, but it is where we need to drive governments. And in this particular study today, where we're looking at the energy transition, actually, geospatial policies and some of the things that we might need to, for example, collect data on broadly in a government environment, some of those will be impacted by the needs of the energy sector as we go forward, and these things just need to be tied together. The second is foundation data. And foundation data is not just the geospatial data that organizations, renowned organizations like Ordnance Survey deliver. Foundation data is actually wider in our thinking here. It is anything that is largely geospatial in nature that a government has a need to ensure for that particular nation. So meteorology data, statistical data, there are various other types of data which are foundation data, the scaffolding, if you like, to the information ecosystem that we are within. And it needs to be, I'll just go back, there's a need for it to be continuously updated as well. And it's very difficult to strive towards that. But what we're seeing is with foundation data, 5-year-old, 10-year-old, even 40-year-old foundation data doesn't actually help deliver the knowledge needed for today's decisions. So this updating more frequently, and eventually continuously updated for some use cases becomes important. Partnerships and collaboration is the third. And this isn't just about everyone talks about public-private partnerships. It's not about that. That's a small part of it. It's about collaborations between industries that, for example, have taken AI forward quite comprehensively, and industries like space, this is an easy one, isn't it, that have developed great ways of capturing much data. And of course, we're seeing some of those collaborations, and there's a Airbus and Ecopia AI have a partnership to do exactly that, to use machine learning technologies to extract data from space-based platforms. That's just an example of where collaboration and partnership are moving into new areas. And I think it's really important to recognise there are few businesses big enough now to do everything on their own. Industry leadership. Industry is absolutely part of it. And the reason we've used the word leadership is to reflect that actually much of the innovation and change in geospatial is being driven by industry in this day and age. And I think without any doubt, it's been delivered in collaboration, and the United Kingdom's program to help with geospatial startups, the Geovation program, is an example of many different businesses, government sector, and others coming together to help startups who are going to use geospatial technologies to succeed. So industry has a real part to play, a leading part to play. And something that we must never lose sight of is the much wider applications, analytics and modeling environment. And we're not just talking here about geospatial technologies. We're not just talking about GIS here. We're actually talking about the ability to take different forms of data using different tools to deliver the knowledge. And in my simple mind, data is 1/3 of reaching a solution. The applications, the analytics and modeling are the second third, and the third is, if you like, the problem that you're trying to solve. You've got to understand the problem to bring those other things to bear on that particular problem. But we absolutely are focused on the modeling, analytics and applications environment. And indeed, if you take an example, and I don't want to go into the detail here, but ultimately it's businesses with the different processes, different applications, different digital tools that are delivering the impact of geospatial, the actual value, the impact of geospatial out to society. The last part, the last element, is the geospatial dimension to the wider digital ecosystem. We know the digital infrastructure is what we have to work on. It is developing. We don't need separate geospatial infrastructures. We need to sit on that wider digital infrastructure. But we need location to be considered by different industries, by different parts of society, as a fundamental part of the work that they do, which is exactly the reason that we're having this discussion today. I mentioned the United Nations work, and I don't want to brief it. Greg Scott from the United Nations would have been here today, but is otherwise engaged. But this is about helping nations create geospatial information. And there's been a lot of debate about, well, how does the UNIGIF relate to GKI? Well, this diagram just tries to explain it. The work the United Nations has done helps deliver that foundation data, and it helps deliver it in nations around the world, in particular developing nations. It is a framework to help reach a solution. And you can see it has an absolute part to play with GKI, and that's the relationship that we are involved with the United Nations Statistics Division with, because actually industry that's come together on this partnership and is just not an environment the United Nations works heavily with. And this partnership can bring industry, can bring that wider digital infrastructure together with the work the UN is doing with national governments. And in a sense, what GKI is for the United Nations is the hook for geospatial into the wider digital ecosystem. I've talked enough. I'm going to draw that to a close so that we can get into the real meat of the discussion. But what I've tried to show you is part of a journey. It is a journey that is for us a 3-year project with our partners to try and see how we move geospatial from where it was to where it is going to. So thank you very much for your attention. The white paper, if anyone's interested, and the white paper was published, oh gosh, back earlier in the summer. But the white paper's there available on the web for people to have a look at. But just be aware, this is a continuously developing concept. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John, for highlighting the need for transition and having a new vision and projecting the principles and elements of geospatial knowledge infrastructure. And also key to this entire, discussion of knowledge infrastructure, the relationship between GKI and the UN IGIF is very key for the sectors as well as geospatial industry to understand. So thank you so much, John. Our next address is a keynote address by Mr. Kuldeep Kaul, the energy consultant at the World Bank. So, Mr. Kuldeep, the floor is yours for the keynote address.
Thank you, Anamika. Thank you, John, for giving a wonderful insight about geospatial. So basically, a lot of things have been said about geospatial, but I would like to confine it to the energy sector. So my first slide, Anamika. Uh, can I have the first slide? Yeah, next slide. Yeah. See, I would like to go through the generation part. See, in India, if, in the worldwide, the energy produced is around 27,000 terawatt hour, and the major energy generating countries are China, 7,503 terawatt hour, USA 4286, India 1560, and followed by Russia and Japan. Next slide, please. Ah, see, why we are going for energy transition basically from the fossil fuel to the clean energy. Now, if you see the total energy classification is fossil fuel around 63.3%, out of which coal is 36.7%, gas is 23.5%, oil is 3.1%. So, if you see previously in the year 2000, it was around 84.3%. That means we are going more towards clean energy. And if you see the next slide, that shows the less carbon part of it, like biofuel, ideal around 2. So in this case, we have seen that from 35.2 risen to 36.7%. So we are seeing there's a small shift towards green energy. Now, talking specifically, next slide, please. If you see now, more than 1/3 of the global electricity comes from low carbon sources, but a lot is not of total energy does not. See, if you see, oil is the energy that is generated 63.3% is from the what we call this fossil fuel, and 36.7 is from the low carbon. So as I said, oil is 2.1, coal is 36.7, gas is 23.5, nuclear is 10.4, hydropower is 15.8, wind and so on and so forth. Now the energy breakup, where this energy is being used, if you see here, oil is 33.1%. In the previous it was 3.1, because here it is used in the electricity generation, the transportation and the heating in the cold countries. Then again here the coal has gone down from 36.7 to 27%, and here again gas is approximately the same. So it shows that although coal is, more, we generate a lot of energy from coal, but its total impact is slightly less. This is one thing I would like to share. Now, why are we going from energy transition? See, basically, if specifically talk about India, in for last 7 years, there have been a lot of changes from the fossil fuel to the clean energy. in India, we are, having a lot of energy, and we are not putting any new plants for last 5 years because for two reasons. The energy generated in India is enough to cater the demand. We have an average transmission distribution loss of around 23%, which is very high as compared to the international standard of around 12%. Yes, India is a huge country. We have a lot of transmission distribution lines, which is affecting the T&D losses. But yes, and secondly, if you see a lot of products that are being developed in India, they are coming with a star rating, which shows them energy efficiency. Up around 10 years back or 15 years back, India as a country didn't have much of electrical efficient, these motors or equipments. We used to have a lot of incandescent lamps. They all of them have been replaced by these LED, LCD lamps. All fridges, TVs, heavy duty equipments, they are going from a normal high class to more energy efficient devices. So this is what we call the energy transition. In a country like India, where the maximum energy generated is from fossil fuel based thermal power plants, but we are seeing that there's a gradual shift from thermal power plants to solar to nuclear. One more thing I would like to add, that in a country like India, where I as a person who consume power, now we are becoming from a consumer to a prosumer. That means if you have a chance to visit India, you will find all big societies, all big offices, they're having a rooftop solar plant based on their rooftop, which is not only generating the electricity, but they're supplying to the discom and getting benefit from them. So rooftop solar is a thing which has really changed the consumers to prosumers. Even if you see in the rural part of India, most of the Indian farmers, they have tube well, which is required to get the water from the down water soil and pump their field. But they used to have diesel or electrical motors which were often wound and rewound and decreasing the efficiency. But here now what is happening? We are going for the solar based panel pumps. So they generate the energy which is used to get the power, and when there is no requirement for the this water pumps, the same energy is being again dispersed to the discom. So a farmer is increasing his income by many folds, not only by selling his food items, what he's making, but he's selling the power. So it is a scheme by the name of Kusum, which has been developed and which is being implemented throughout India. So this will be a game changer for India. Next slide, Anamika. Next slide, please, with Nisha. Yeah. Now, what is energy transition? It is a pathway towards transformation of the global energy from fossil based to zero carbon by the second half of the century. See, as per Government of India policy, there is a strong that by 2050, maximum energy that is produced shall be clean energy. So why this? Because we need to reduce energy related to CO2 emission to limit climate change. As already said by Anamika in the beginning, decarbonization of the energy sector requires urgent action on a global scale. India is a member for this Kyoto Act, and they are trying to fulfill all the requirements. Renewable energy and energy efficiency measure can potentially achieve 90% of the carbon reduction. Because if we go for this 2050 mark, I am hopeful that there will be a lot of clean energy. Even yesterday there was an article that Indian Railways, which is one of the biggest private sector in India, will generate about 78 megawatt of power at across the railway station. All railway stations will be having on their rooftop solar energy generation, which will not only feed the power system in railways but also export to the discom. So these are the small steps by which energy will be produced. There is a scheme in Government of India that all big houses having more than 400 yards, rooftop, they have to go for rooftop solar. So this is a small step which will definitely change from the fossil fuel based to the clean energy. Then energy transition shall be enabled by IT, information technology, where comes our geospatial, then the smart technology, which is IoT based, then the policy framework, again policy framework is the government regulatory and the market instruments, because for these projects, the Government of India and the World Bank is using a lot of funding to push that country like India becomes more of a clean energy. Next, please. Yeah. Now we are talking about this energy transition. See, energy transition, as per to my knowledge, is based on three pillars. First is the power sector transformation. Second is the energy system models and data, and third is the geospatial intelligence. So talking about the first, that is the power sector transformation, around 65% of total energy shall be satisfied by renewable energy by 2050, which shall be approximately 85% of electricity generation. This includes 60% of electricity to be supplied by solar, photovoltaic and wind. If you see recently, when we used to, in a country like India or even Africa, and where I've done a lot of projects, what we used to have solar based on a land or rooftop. But now with the coming of floating solar, lot of lakes and lot of dams, solar energy is being produced. The good thing about this floating solar is that the efficiency is more than the based on the land, because you have to maintain the temperature around 25 degrees. So when you have when you have these solar PV cells in a floating water, they have the cooling effect. So we did experiment in one of the projects in Afghanistan, where we had a 10 megawatt solar generation in one dam, and the other was on the land side. We found that the energy generated in the same area on the land as well as on the dam was much higher in case of dam. So with the changing of this floating solar, it will be a game changer. Also, a lot of development has taken place in the solar films. Initially, these solar panels were, we used to have efficiency about 17 to 18%. Now we are having bifacial solar panels. So that means which enhances the capacity by 30%. Generally, what we see when the irradiance comes to the solar panels, they generate the power, but there's always a reflection part. So that means a solar panel will generate only power from the irradiance that comes from the sun, but also from the backside. So it will be bifacial energy, which will enhance generation by 35% more. Then we are also having these what we call the flexible solar films. In I have seen a lot of in buildings which are not purely round, which are not purely square around. They are curvature. So you have a floating solar. You have this what do you call this? These films which are highly flexible. You can put them like on the like a wallpaper on the outer surface of the house, and you are able to generate a lot of power. So it will affect two. One is you have the cooling effect. The heat won't enter the premises, but also they will generate the power. So these are some of the game changes that will really change from the fossil fuel to the clean energy. Then is the flexibility is the key word here, in the form of flexible operations. Flexible generation, strong grid, more energy storage, demand response. Now what happens, see, there are many places especially where you have off grid and on grid. When we say on grid, that means there's a power generation, there's a backup from the discom, and you sell when it's off grid, that means it's a place where it is through storage battery. Now for last 7 years, with the invent of lithium batteries, the efficiency is increased. So you can generate the power, have the inverter, put them in the battery, use them as a backup. So if we really are able to produce more of this for off grid, we're able to have more better batteries. I think it can help those areas which are not still connected with the power lines. Third is the product knowledge and how best to leverage flexibility across the energy sector. Now, what is happening? See, a lot of technologies are coming day in and day out. A lot of R&D is happening. So it is very important that all the people who are the key holders for the stakeholders, they should know how best they can make of it. What are the various innovations they can do? For example, what I told example like floating solar or bifacial solar panels. These are something which was not, probably known about 3 years back. But with a lot of R&D coming, I am hopeful that this will be the game changer. And secondly, the prices of these solar panels are decreasing day by day. A lot of companies, I remember initially, a lot of solar panels are made either from West or from China, but now small countries like India and other countries are also developing a lot of solar panels in-house, although they may be imported partly from other countries. So I see that after 30, 40 years, hardly there will be any what you call these called thermal power plants. They may be only as a backup, but not as a regular. So there's a shift from dirty fuel that we call the fossil fuel to clean energy. Next, please. Next was the energy system model and data. See, now what is happening, we have to support the global energy transition involves wide ranging of energy modeling and analysis. So here comes the geospatial basically. how best we can see. Recently I had a chance to review one of the papers developed one small, there's a small app called Keres. It's a cloud based application that enables individual and team to optimize plan energy system of all complexities with powerful new algorithm. This has been developed by young students of Stanford University. They've already done one pilot project in Bermudas with a client called Homer Energy. So I had a chance to view that. It is similar to your Geospatial, but at any point of time, it tells you how much energy has been produced, where it is being transmitted, what are the losses, and it is all real-time based. So they are trying to sell this technology to various, institutions and various things. It also has a load dispatch center. For example, if there are 5 grids, from which grid which power should come, what is the maximum efficiency. So it is still in a very nascent stage, but yes, I would request everybody, if, given a chance, they should go through this career system. It is a very good thing. I was really amazed by the lot of work they have done, young engineers from Stanford. Then modeling and analysis tool includes the long-term capacity, which include the system planning test flat model for long-term energy planning. Now, what happens? See, whenever we do planning for energy sector, for example, we don't see for next 1 year, 2 years. We see planning for next 25 years, because every year there's a growth in economy, there's a urbanization, there's a growth of energy need. So we plan for next 25 years. So this is called the long-term capacity. Even we can try for 30 or maybe even 40 years. Then you have to unit commitment and dispatch, energy storage and smart grids, system flexibility assessment. Now what happens basically, as I said, for example, you are setting up a new city, or what we call in the smart city. So you should know what is the present demand for maybe as on date, what should be the demand for next 10 years, what should be the demand for next 30 years, based on certain algorithms like MATLAB or certain softwares were able to find. Then again, based on that, for to have a quality power. When we say quality power, it means the things. It means that the end climate should have uninterrupted power supply, his voltage, current, and all things should be in line with the requirements. So for that, we need to have a smart grid. For example, if there's any fault, it should get tripped, it should not propagate. Even if there's a fault, then there should be another RMU, ring main unit, so that the consumer or that dwelling is not deprived of power. Then we have the operational planning, that is grid integration studies. Now, what is happening in normal transmission distribution? We have a very strong grid network, but once we are for off grid, in that case, we have to develop a system that there's a stability power. Because what happens in a country like India, in some part you may not have more than 300 days of sunny weather, and we have a huge monsoon time when the efficiency of irrigation decreases. So grid integration, there should be storage of power either, or there should be some backup. The basic aim is that all dwelling units, they should be connected with the grid, and wherever grid is not possible, they should be off grid for the time being, and those off grid should have a storage facility, so that that the power that generates over a period of days or weeks, it should be able to store. So focus should be on the storage. Next, please. Yeah, so if you see this diagram, you see how we do the planning. It is a long-term energy planning module that is based on time resolution is for hours and seasons. Like for example, in a country like India, the maximum demand is around after 7 p.m. To 11 p.m. In during daytime, the demand decreases. Although we right now we have the fixed tariff, but yes, in some cities it is being proposed that tariff should be on time based. Then you have the battle planning models, which includes for hours and seasons. Here we do the planning for network capacities. For example, if you see for solar, the rates vary. For thermal, rates vary. For hydro, the rates vary. So how best you can buy the power at what should be the network capacities. The lines that are being there, are they are not overloaded. Recently, there's a one KfW funded project in MP, which is called the Green Corridor. So there are a lot of solar parks around MP and those areas. A dedicated 220 kV transmission line is being constructed, which will only supply what you call the green energy. That means the energy produced by solar panels. Then you have the network topology, that is production cost modules. it will go further down, what you call the for minutes and hours, what is the trend, what is the maximum demand, how demand will vary. Then you have the static grid models, that is time resolution for single point. It is highly resolved dispatching operation details. As I said, we have the discounts by power from different agencies, so they have to identify from where they can get the cheapest power. Then you have the dynamic grid models. It is again for milliseconds to minutes. So it is against steady state grid currents and voltage. Now, and again, there's a feedback. So it is like a cyclic information. If you see on the right side is the low detail wide scope on the top and high narrow scope. So basically, for any planning, whatever you do, we have to have the grasp for the next 25 to 30 years. But at the same time, there should be focus on the last minute details. See what happens sometimes. I have seen as a planning engineer, we plan for next 30 years, but in those planning, we miss out the uh, present. So there has to be proper coordination between the next 10 years and the present. We cannot ignore present for the future and vice versa. So here a lot of things happen, a lot of hard work, lot of software tools have to be put. Even our geospatial can be of great help to make it to place. Next slide, please.
Mr. Kuldeep, if you can, wrap up because we're running short of time now. It's
Okay.
already like ahead of time.
Uh, I mean, see, these are some of the models that we follow that is called the energy planning support, then the LTP, then the capacity building, then the long-term energy scenarios. Next slide, please. Then you have the system planning SPLAT model. The system is a system planning model for the least cost optimization framework for an applied model for energy planning through capacity building activities. And then the third is the geospatial. That's the last thing, and that I will be over with that. Now, where geospatial can help us? GIS helps direct planning, analyzing complex data to pinpoint best site from multitude of physical, economical, and regulatory factors. GI dashboards make sense of streaming of data in real time, dials, charts, and maps. I would like to give one small example. I was in Uganda about a year back. I mean, before the COVID, there in a Ford portal. It was a highly forest area, so we had to do the survey for a transmission line. So practically, it was not possible to go and to survey through that area. So we used drone. So what I am trying to say, use of drone in power sector is being highly now put into place to have a correct data and to minimize the time, because if my person would have gone there, it would take anything about 7 to 10 days to get the data, and that same data we got in a couple of hours, which was highly accurate. We showed all the 3D points. So I think there's a lot of scope for energy transition and the geospatial to work as a team and make it more reliable, more accurate, and a better performer. So with this, I end my session. Thank you. If any questions, do let me know.
Thank you, Mr. Kuldeep, for setting us the tone on energy transition as a pathway towards transformation and shall be enabled by IT, smart technologies, policy framework, and market involvement. Thank you so much for your insight. And now we will go ahead with our first session of the day, which is on adoption and integration of geospatial knowledge and 4IR technology in energy transition. And this session will highlight on integration of geospatial knowledge platform and fourth industrial revolution technologies for data analysis and knowledge creation, and where are there further opportunities for the use of this geospatial knowledge within the sector. And the moderator for this session is Mr. John Kedar, the strategic advisor, geospatial infrastructure with Geospatial World. So with this, I hand over the floor to Mr. John.
Thank you, Anamika, and thank you very much, Kuldeep, for a very interesting presentation. Not just from the sort of global perspective, but actually talking about the challenges and looking at the challenges in particular and the solutions being developed in India, and highlighting how geospatial can play a real part. And I pulled out a number of things that you said, and not necessarily the ones in your summary slide there. We of course had the COP26 conference in Glasgow here in the UK quite recently, which highlighted some of the real policy challenges as on a global basis, and the international collaboration needed in a very difficult area. But interestingly, we've seen more and more countries make commitments to go carbon neutral within the next number of decades, and it varies from country to country, of course. But that's a massive commitment, and I think the slide that you showed, Kuldeep, that demonstrated the overall energy use versus just the electricity generation use was very telling in demonstrating quite how far we have to go over that time frame. But you talked about land use management, planning, policy, getting approvals through governments. We talked a little bit about that modelling and that planning. There's a whole issue around with electricity of getting generation to consumer, and how complex that is now that consumers are also generating electricity. Wider asset management, you talked about efficient operations using technologies, and a number of other things in your talk really highlighted where geospatial can play a part. But I just, as we go to our first panel, I just highlight the fact that we're really trying to look at energy transition, which is, in other words, helping us towards those commitments of carbon neutrality that governments are making around the world. And it's a real delight to have on our first panel 4 panelists. I shall introduce you one at a time and then give you your allocated time for your introductory remarks, which I suspect is about 10 minutes, 7 to 10 minutes. And then when you've all spoken, we'll just have a little bit of a discussion between us. And for the audience, if you've got any particular questions that you wish to ask our panelists, please do put them into the chat, and I'll pick those up and make sure, if there's time permitting, that the panelists have an opportunity to answer those. So the first of our panelists on this session is an old friend of mine who I haven't seen during COVID days, but Carsten Ronsdorf, who is, after 19 years, still with Great Britain's mapping agency, Ordnance Survey. And there he is the strategic propositions manager currently, but he's helped develop much of Ordnance Survey's thinking in terms of its digital platform, its data infrastructures. But he's also been with the Open Geospatial Consortium from Ordnance Survey, doing a lot of work helping develop the thinking and indeed the standards necessary for geospatial to play a real part in delivering benefit. Carsten is someone who has an enormous international reputation. It doesn't matter where in the world you go, there are people know Carsten. And we're very lucky to have him with us this afternoon. So Carsten, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. So I think this is really a timely opportunity to present on what I think is really a really powerful application field for geospatial technologies, the energy transition. And what I would like to go through is I would like to start with 2 implementation examples to do something quite practical, then talk a little bit about the kind of bigger picture that has already come out in the 2 talks we had today, and then a few remarks about interoperability to round things off. So we saw in the previous presentation an indication of kind of where our energy comes from. And in the UK, we have a called an electricity system operator for the electricity network, and they came up with quite a useful app on there for mobile phone, where you can actually check what the current mix of the energy generation in the country is in pretty much real time. So you can start this app, and then you see I did this morning that 39 of the energy of the electricity, I should say, in Great Britain was generated from largely renewable sources and counted as zero carbon. you can go a little bit further, and if you are kind of conscious in terms of not or reducing your carbon footprint a little bit, you have an outlook, and you can see in kind of 2-hour windows when it would be a good time, let's say, to switch on your washing machine or your dishwasher. So you see earlier this morning, the carbon footprint for 1 kilowatt hour was kind of reasonably high. It grows a little bit later in the day, and then towards the night it will drop off to this level. But you can also have a look at how the regional differences are in the country. And you see this color coding here, where we have a very low impact in green to a very high impact in kind of reddish brown in the southeast of England, where I'm currently am, whilst in the north of Scotland, the carbon impact seems to be very low. And if we go to one of the areas south of Scotland, for instance, then we see that 94% of the energy in this area is generated from zero carbon, and an astounding 64% of wind. So it seems to be a reasonably windy day today. So this is what technology allows us to do today. And an app like that can actually influence consumer behavior, which is a point I'll be coming back to in a little while. So the real example I wanted to show you is the work that we've done this year together with the Energy Networks Association and our technology partners at Geospatial in creating a prototype or a proof of concept for the first UK National Energy Systems Map. And I think it's easiest to show you or to talk to you about one of the use cases. And that use case is that there's a company that wants to electrify charging, not of individual vehicles owned by private people, but of an entire bus depot, let's say for the public transport system for a city. And they've identified kind of 4 bus depots as candidate sites for electrification. They have some detail about this in terms of the number of buses, the current electricity connection, the required upgrade, and so on. And with a tool we developed, it allows us to basically take this spreadsheet, drop it onto this interface, and then we see the 4 points, the 4 different bus depots with the attribution that we just saw before. And then if we zoom into one, we can actually bring up the low voltage electricity network. Here we can get an indication about the capacity or the substation headroom, kind of is the local energy system actually capable of a reasonably large additional connection. And we can immediately see, because it's displayed in green, that this substation that serves the bus depot here in this town is actually unconstrained. So there's a great chance that this electrification of the bus depot is actually a possibility. So it's not constrained by the network capacity at this point in time or in the near future. So that's a fairly useful query that really goes into investment into green infrastructures and into changing, in this case, at the intersection of transport and electricity. So in the UK, we have, or in Great Britain, we have a scenario which I think is quite common to a number of countries, where you don't have one single operator of the distribution and transition networks. We have about 14 license areas in Great Britain. And as you can imagine, in terms of the way they manage their data, everybody does it in a slightly different way. And the value that we really bring in the context of this work is that we bring together the data from all these 14 license areas, from all the different commercial companies who operate the electricity networks, into one single environment. So no matter whether you go to Scotland or to Wales or parts of England, you will be presented kind of with the same user interface and with the same data, and you can carry out your queries in the same way. So that creates a lot of value. That's just a bit more detail from a different area. So you saw the interface. What you didn't really see is the work that went on behind the scenes, and that has to do a lot with data modeling, with data transformation, with defining data requirements to see how this would look like. It has also a lot to do with engagement with the stakeholders, the individual data providers, as well as users and policy units and in government, and also with the creation of a legal framework that actually makes this level of data sharing a possibility. And that has kept me, actually fairly busy for the best part of 2021. So this is a quick summary about the potential of this tool, as it's seen as an essential tool in really managing the new decarbonized energy system in both gas and electricity going forward. Now, coming to the slightly more big picture stuff. So I tried to come up with what I call simplified recipe to net zero. And it strikes me that if we start with number one at the very kind of high policy level on international or national front, then I think with the agreements around the Paris Agreement and COP26, as well as national law, we're seeing really mandatory checkpoints being put in place on the way to net zero and then to net zero by 2050. And then on the other side, number 6 down there, it's really about individuals and our individual behaviors. And I think there's really well, there's a need and the challenge at the same time that consumers, and that really means all consumers of energy, to become active parts in the energy system. So how can we close this gap between number 1 and number 6? And I think the simple recipe is that we want to make really all electricity generation net zero by kind of getting rid of generation from gas and coal and oil and so on. We want to migrate as much of the energy consumption to electricity. That's not necessarily always possible for all the users. So when we think about heat generation, which is in an important part in the colder parts of the world, there is technology that allows you to heat a home from electricity, but it might not be feasible to implement this everywhere. And then if you look into transport, I think we can all see that it's currently quite impractical to kind of put a large plane into the air just powered by batteries or renewable sources. So in order to make that happen, there really needs to be an investment into innovation, and we need a lot of innovation on this way to net zero. And the digitization of the energy system is really seen as a key enabler for innovation. And that's what we're trying to do with a tool such as the National Energy Systems Map. So the creation of the tool really goes back to UK government policy, where in 2018 there was a recommendation from a group called the Energy Data Task Force. Actually, at that time, it is transitioned into the Digitization Task Force, which is the name of the group now, where they made recommendations that the energy system shall be digitalized, that the use of data should be maximized. And in order to do this, there are kind of 3 different pillars. One is to increase the visibility of data, which is really a data infrastructure, not too dissimilar to what we know in the geospatial industry with a spatial data infrastructure. Then there should be a registration of all assets, and that really means all car charging points, all solar panels, all heat pumps, and so on. And then number 5 is the creation of a digital systems map, which is really the infrastructure that the network operators put in. And so what we've done is really an answer to this policy goal number 5, the creation of a digital systems map. So if we look at data, we see the Open Data Institute in the UK's their data spectrum, which really ranges from open data on the right-hand side to closed data. And whilst some of the energy data might be open or is open already, we expect that a lot of the data will fall into the shared data category in the middle, where there's still some access control, so that the organizations and people who need to know will have access to the relevant data. When it comes to data interoperability, I think we saw that what the concept of a spatial data infrastructure that the geospatial community is really familiar with in terms of SDI is very much applicable in the energy sector, because the energy systems are spatially distributed. And we worked on data, we worked on applications, but the majority of the effort really went into the data sharing and data integration bit in the middle, which is partly about platform and the technical capability, but a lot about community and standards and actually learning to work together and aligning expectations and aligning, that basically everybody pulls into the same directions to make a new thing work. So one of the technical elements, and I would like to close with this, is really the need for common data models. And John referenced it briefly in his introduction. I work quite a bit with the Open Geospatial Consortium, and not so much in the energy transition, but we've been working with the OGC for a number of years now on underground infrastructure, which is quite heavily influenced by utility infrastructure and the energy infrastructure, where we're well on the way to publicizing a unified data model that brings together energy data with other utility data and environmental data in the underground, which may as well be a starting point, to creating energy system standards as far as they have a geospatial dimension. So in summary, I think the energy transition is really one of the prime opportunities for geospatial data and technology, and with the difficulty of making net zero a reality over the next 29 years or so, I think it's a theme that will stay with us for a long period of time. And I'm looking forward to hearing the other speakers and the other presenters to say what their take on the system is. Thank you very much.
Carsten, thank you very much indeed, and very interesting, and for bringing it to life with what's going on in the UK. We're going to go to our second presenter now, Alberto Troccoli, who's the Managing Director at the World Energy and Meteorology Council, the CEO at Inside Climate Service, and visiting professor at the University of East Anglia. So quite a handful, quite a portfolio that you have there, Alberto. I wonder if you're also a Norwich City Football Club supporter. Alberto, we look forward to what you have to say on this subject.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm going to share my slides very soon. So it's a pleasure to be with this exciting audience here and to share some of the experience, particularly in the climate area. So yeah, I've got a few affiliations here. I like to collect them, and so I'm actually now based in Australia because I got stuck here before COVID. We moved here in November, and then we couldn't move anymore. But and I'm not, I'm afraid, a football fan. So yeah, it's. I mean, I used to be. I don't follow anymore. So I'm sorry about the Norwich thing. If anything, I'm a Juventus fan from my youth. Anyway, so I just want to start with this picture of electricity interconnection. So this comes from GEICO. Some of you may know the Global Electricity Interconnection Development and Cooperation Organization, Chinese-based organization, which is preparing some plans. This is a plan, of course, to connect the whole globe through the transmission grid. So this is a kind of vision which is useful to have, very challenging to achieve, and we don't know whether it's going to be achieved, as you know, all the challenges that we faced with Desertec Australia, for Desertec in Africa and Europe, and then there was Desertec in Australia as well. And yeah, not much has come out yet, but it's good to have this. And the reason for showing this is that I want to make the connection with the energy that was discussed before, because after this I'm pretty much switching to more the climate. So I could talk about energy, but my esteemed speakers before, colleagues, and have already talked about energy quite a lot. So I want to just show you now, as a transition towards weather and climate, and therefore meteorology, that there is a very close connection between energy and meteorology. In fact, the two are inseparable. So if we look at over a time horizon, we start from the past, say the last 40, 50 years, whatever time we have where we have good measurements for both climate and energy, we make use a lot of climate data and observations to assess, for example, severe events that happened in the past in order to plan future systems. So that's just one example. And just these are very um, simple examples that we go through. So, and then when we look at the future, we have different timescales we can look at in terms of forecast. We can look at seconds, we can look at minutes, days, months, and so on. And for each of them, there are many applications. So for the seconds, for example, we understand that when there's a passing clouds or thunderstorms, that has a huge effect on the production of solar from PV. So there are ways to predict that, and that's really critical for maintaining the stability of the grid, for example. And then longer timescales on days, we know that there are big cells like hurricanes developing, and we can now predict them with a few days in advance. So that's again something useful when we want to, for example, plan for disruption to oil rig operations, probably less and less as we move forward, but that's something we need to account for also for environmental reasons and oil spills and so on. And then moving on, we have El Nino, so the intra-annual variability that causes changes to a large part of the globe, and this changes, particularly in temperature, will have effect in changes in demand patterns in many countries. And then long-term changes that are used, for example, for renewable resource assessment. But these are just examples, just to give you a flavor of the interconnection between energy and climate, because we, as I said, we talked about climate, energy, and now we're moving towards climate. So I want to make a smooth transition between the two. And another transition we do is through the systems that we set up under the Copernicus program. So Copernicus is a huge program in Europe, for those of you who don't know, based on originally satellite data, but it's much more than satellite. And it's funded at the tune of billions of euros. So we are on the second phase for another 7 years. One component of this is the climate change service. Under this service, we operate with the World Energy Meteorology Council, we operate an operational system that converts climate data into electricity data. So what we do, we take a huge amount of data from the climate, and then we have conversion models that use different methodologies from more physical models. The wind power, you don't need much complex models. But then when it comes to PV, for example, we start to use more complexity, statistical models, and so on. And then we go to machine learning for hydropower generation. And then we also have electricity demand. So we create a huge data set of data at the stage is just for Europe. And they cover a period that goes from 1970s and soon to 1950 to present, and then for the future up to 2100. And we also provide seasonal forecasts that cover the next 6 months. So from every month, there is a new seasonal forecast that is useful for managing resources and anticipating, for example, heat waves or phenomena like this that affect obviously electricity demand and several other things in the energy sector. So all this then has been developed into a tool, their various visualization tool. We are focusing now on this one that we maintain. We started with this tool was developed under the Copernicus Climate Change Service is available online here, the address here. And here you can find a wealth of data for climate and energy. So here, for example, we are showing And again, this is for Europe for this particular one. And we are showing here, for example, how the solar radiation varies in time up to 2100 with the shading that demonstrate the uncertainty or the range possible scenarios that envisaged at this stage. And it's all based on some of the best data produced by international centers for climate data. So this is one of the products. I'm not going to discuss much about what's behind, but as you can imagine, and also as mentioned already by Carsten, there's a lot of a lot of conventions, a lot of data management behind the scenes that allow the system to run operationally every month and produce the data in an automated way, and then it can display it on tools like this. So behind this, there's a huge amount of work trying to homogenize the data, find the right conventions down to what file name. File name is a very complex one, and you need to decide on all that. And people working on with geospatial data would know this very well. But yeah, this picture here doesn't show the complexity behind. I just wanted to highlight what's a little bit what is behind this. And then you can also select PV power, like here, for example, you have the purple icon at the top showing PV, and the image shows for Spain how the projection of power from PV is going to be under a scenario called small local smart and storage, which was one of the scenarios produced by major centers in Europe looking at energy scenarios. Again, this is available on this side. And then from here, we took a leap and went from a European-based visualization tool, GIS kind of tool, to a global one. And here is the teal. So teal is not an acronym, is color, as you know. And the color comes actually from the space here in between the countries, because we here plot only countries. So you see only the colors on the countries that represent variables or like temperature. But the ocean at the moment is fixed and it has this nice teal color, and hence the name of the tool. For a bit of poetry or a bit of imagination and creativity. So the tool is freely available online at the address you find here. And again, here, just to show a little bit how it works, when you click on a country, you get the data. At the moment, we have historical data, but all the projection data are available, and we're also working on the energy data. This one also displays carbon emissions. So this is tell you from the 1960 for each country how much emissions has been made, so you can compare that and relate to, for example, temperature increases. So in this case, it's just solar radiation, which is obviously a key element in PV power production, together with air temperature. And here's some of the, if you go to the website, you'll find some information. I won't go into the details, so just to let you know that there is quite a bit of material there that help you to understand better what's behind the tool. And if you want to learn even more about the energy and meteorology, there's a free book that we published a couple of years ago about weather and climate services for the energy industry. And I think that's it. Let's work together towards the energy transition. Thank you for your attention.
Alberto, thank you very much indeed. And actually, you've stressed, as actually Carsten has just done in the chat, the importance of collaboration in here. And I think your booklet you talked about just shows how that materializes. But thank you for giving us that insight into how modeling and data come together to actually deliver some real useful knowledge for decision makers in different countries. I'd like to move on, if I may, to our third speaker. Our third speaker this afternoon is Aurangzeb Qureshi, who I think is joining us from Riyadh. He's had a decade in the energy sector, working very much in policy, and is a senior energy analyst at the International Energy Forum in Riyadh. But he also has a public relations background. It'll be quite interesting as we go through this to hear some of how he thinks we should be messaging our thoughts to the wider audience. Aurangzeb, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate the introduction. You can hear me and you can see the presentation, yes? I just want to make sure that it's visible.
Hear you and see the presentation.
Excellent.
You're not in presentation mode. We can see your
there we go.
Your slide sorter.
So thank you to Geospatial World Team and UNSD for organizing. It's a pleasure to be participating. As all the excitement and enthusiasm behind energy transitions, as we've spoken about at length, and these new energy technologies that will help us reach our sustainable goals eventually, we can often lose sight of how other technologies can help us supplement, manage, and adapt to new energy realities. And of course, here, the contribution of geospatial technologies will be paramount as we navigate through what is bound to be a very complex and multidimensional, multifaceted energy transition. Of course, the knowledge infrastructure related to this field is vast and diverse, as we've seen through some of the presentations that have been presented. I will focus primarily on the geospatial monitoring and satellite mapping technologies towards decarbonization, just to make it more clear, concise, for the sake of brevity and conciseness, and how they can help the world meet priorities that aim to balance energy security with energy access, affordability, and of course, climate considerations. But just as some context as to where we are right now from an energy perspective. So as we know, demand recovery is underway. And despite variants of concern, knock on wood, global oil demand is set to increase around 5 to 6 million barrels per day in 2021, and about 3 to 4 million barrels a day in 2022, according to major short-term outlooks, including the IEA, OPEC, and the Energy Information Administration in the US. So we can see here in the graph how we were in the negative territory in 2020, and how that's just kind of spiked as we've approached a post-COVID recovery, or as we approach post-COVID environment, hopefully. And demand has been relatively stable. Right now, based on the latest reports, we're at 5 to 6 million barrels a day growth in 2021, and 3 to 4 million barrels a day in 2022. And you can see the major demand growth centers, India, US, and China, are also going to be seeing increases in both those years. But of course, an increase in energy consumption and demand also means an increase in CO2 emissions. So after a record drop in 2020, which was a 6% drop, emissions are expected to rise again by almost 5% in 2021. And we can see that here with this massive spike in growth. So the question becomes, how do we balance this increase in demand in a post-COVID environment and based on this pent-up demand? And then how do we balance that with this climate situation on the other, and mitigate the harmful effects of carbon emissions? So of course, as we know, and as has been mentioned, there have been a couple of initiatives globally this year where there has essentially been a general consensus on that climate change mitigation is something that needs to be done. Of course, COP26 countries struck an agreement to combat climate change, as reflected in the Glasgow Climate Pact. There's a G20 collaboration in late October, where notably the IF was called on to bolster the efficiency, transparency, and stability of energy markets while addressing climate change. And data is an important aspect of that. We saw back in August the UN IPCC report, part 1 of the AR6, that continued, that said that there's a strengthening of the links between human-caused warming and increasingly extreme weather. And last but not least, there was a G7 that outlined key climate commitments in line with limiting the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius and achieving net zero by 2050. So, of course, there is this global consensus and the world is working towards that. What is the IEF doing to support these measures? A focus on circular carbon economy technologies like carbon capture, use, and storage essentially allows carbon to be sequestered underground and allows industrial, through various industrial applications that can meet decarbonization, affordability, energy security goals. So, 3 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. The green hydrogen or hydrogen itself, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, however you want to look at it, is an important topic, especially as an energy carrier. So the IF continues to identify government policies and business models that can make clean gas and hydrogen economics work. Of course, with a technology agnostic mindset. Infrastructure is an important one. We always get caught up into different fuels and different renewables or fossil fuels or nuclear, but we don't look at the infrastructure that allows for it. So the IEF is going to continue looking at infrastructure and what changes need to be made, and how electrification, for instance, can be accommodated with the infrastructure that we have in place. And then methane is an important one. I'm going to talk about that in a bit more detail, but the IF has also undertaken, in collaboration with IF member countries, a methodology for accurate measuring of methane. In a way, methane is low-hanging fruit, but it's also difficult to pinpoint. This is also in parallel to the Global Methane Pledge, which a couple of months ago, over 100 countries committed to reducing global methane emissions by at least 30% from 2020 levels by 2030. So of course, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of moving parts to this. But from a geospatial technologies perspective, I want to talk about carbon capture, use, and storage, which I think, we talk about these clean energy technologies, but geospatial technologies can actually supplement a lot of the investment that we're seeking towards these. So, for example, from a greenhouse gas reduction perspective, geospatial technologies can aid with an analysis of where super emitters are concentrated in a particular geographic area, and their proximity to safe and secure geological storage, because that's essentially what carbon capture does. And can also pinpoint transport infrastructure and other abatement options, which can expedite investment needs. And of course, a big key when it comes to these technologies is public acceptance. So how do we get the public on board? How do we get stakeholders on board? Because that's essentially we will need that at some point. Remote sensing, GIS technologies, satellite imagery can provide an ongoing monitoring component necessary to monitor carbon and methane leaks, ensure a seamless sequestration management, especially when it comes to CCUS hub development, because CCUS is becoming extremely provides a bigger bang for the buck, so to speak, when there's storage and industry clusters in close proximity. So as CCUS gradually builds scale, I think there's over 60 projects worldwide. It will open up more opportunities for geospatial technologies to take hold, because I think they complement each other quite effectively. And here you can see there's numerous applications that CCUS can be used for. Traditionally, it's been for natural gas processing, but interestingly enough, you can see that power generation is where most of the capacity or a lot of the advanced development is taking place. So for countries like India and China, and emissions from coal, natural gas can be potentially sequestered underground to mitigate the impacts of climate change. Now, applying geospatial technologies to methane monitoring, of course, we've talked about some of this already in some of the other presentations. Methane emissions are an important discussion point, given the difficulty in detection, as mentioned before, but methane also is more potent than carbon and can capture more can capture heat more effectively than carbon. So of course, methane reduction is important for IF members. In June, we launched a methane initiative to develop a methane emissions measurement methodology, enabling member countries to collect standardized data to mitigate methane emissions. From a geospatial standpoint, more efforts are needed to map methane emissions through satellite technologies, some of which, of course, are already in place, and others are being launched in the future. Satellite coverage can be global, targeted, or regional, depending on the technology and objective. Nominal detection is a measure of the smallest leak rate that can be quantified, while pixel size is a measure of the increment of the Earth that the satellite can observe. Of course, a pixel size can also cover a large area, so there's still a requirement where you have to really pinpoint where the methane is coming from, and that's where traditional Earth-based and aerial measurements can be used to validate the findings. Also, I think a third point here is that with all the ESG standards and requirements and the pressure that companies are under these days, having a third-party kind of arrangement from satellite imagery can also really help these companies prove a point and maintain investment from investors who are really looking at these ESG requirements as a standard. Right, so this is something that can definitely help going forward when it comes to investment in these technologies. Two examples are there's the Environmental Defense Fund Permian Methane Analysis Project that uses data from satellites, helicopters, aircraft to document the volume of methane emitted across the Permian Basin. And you can see that example here, screenshot here, that kind of shows that. You can also compare the two different companies, three different companies, to see how they're doing on performance. And then here's another one. I think we mentioned this in another presentation. Methane measurements detected through the Copernicus Sentinel 5P satellite, and this image shows concentration values over the Madrid area, and so that's an example of how that can be used. The third, I guess, point here is infrastructure monitoring. From an infrastructure perspective, it is necessary to pay greater attention to monitoring infrastructure as transitions accelerate, and we are faced with new energy realities, including extreme weather events, which are happening more frequently. Effective monitoring leads to effective maintenance, which of course leads to greater energy security and sustainability. From an electricity standpoint, new demands on the grid must be supplemented with greater monitoring efforts to ensure effective grid balancing between supply and demand. These monitoring efforts can also be complemented with data-enriched smart grids in combination with AI and IoT. Of course, there's a huge breadth of technologies that can be supplemented and complemented with each other when it comes to the electricity sector. In the end, I think the point is that this will lead to greater efficiency and ensure energy security. New technologies, of course, include a very high resolution VHR satellite technology, advancing LiDAR mapping and monitoring, and of course drones, unmanned aerial vehicles for monitoring things closer to the Earth's surface. And here we can see on this graph, I just wanted to make a point here that we're seeing a growth in wind and solar, but then obviously fossil fuel demand is also growing as well. So you need monitoring in both areas when it comes to infrastructure. So just two examples here. We can see VHR, very high resolution. An example here with oil tanks, which helps in the estimation of oil and in storage by detecting patterns on how shadows change as the tank is depleted and the lids sink. So it's quite interesting. That's already going on. And here we also see how vegetation encroachment is responsible for 50% of outages. So for the first time in history, the company mapped out the US transmission grid and analyzed it from space. And if we're able to do that, then we can really monitor how vegetation is impacting the grid and minimize risks to keep the lights on, so to speak. So those are just two examples I wanted to highlight. And that actually brings me to the end of the presentation. So thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion.
Aurangzeb, thank you very much indeed for that, and actually for introducing the role of satellite technologies and the satellite data that enables so much monitoring, but indeed also enables some really good planning to be done. I'd like to move on to our fourth speaker, if I may. And our fourth speaker, fourth panelist this afternoon on this session is Abhishek Pandey, who's a process systems engineer at HERE Technologies in India, and is the climate reality leader for the company with their climate reality project. So Abhishek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. Just wanted to confirm if my audio is loud enough, and also if my presentation is visible.
Your presentation is visible. It's not in presentation mode. It is now.
Okay. Thank you. So first of all, thank you to Geospatial World and United Nations Statistical Division for providing us this opportunity to garner as well as disseminate information in terms of energy transition and geospatial technology. So my topic is basically current state of adoption of geospatial and fourth industrial revolution technologies in energy transition. So let me briefly walk you through the agenda, where I would be talking about energy transition, followed by the role of geospatial technology, and fourth industrial revolution. And after that, we would be discussing and looking into the how these two are correlated and how these are amalgamated. And further, we will look into the current adoptions and trends. So without any delay, let's look into the energy transition. So what exactly is energy transition? That is the first question that comes up. So energy transition is basically the crux of energy transition is to make renewable sources of energy our main source while guaranteeing supply for energy to all. And it basically involves two main changes. The first one is new clean energy source, that is to shift from the fossil fuel to clean sources such as wind and solar or geothermal. And then the other point is to reduce the consumption. So by that we mean making use of energy efficient and less power consuming appliances which have high rate of energy efficiency, and obviously to stop wastage of electricity through conventional techniques. Now, how it can be achieved? So this may sound ambitious, but we have to interconnect it with our whole energy system, that is integrating our novel storage techniques through digitization and digitalization of the entire system, as well as generating genuine electricity price models. But with this, enormous challenges arise in terms of regulation, affordability, reliability, and networking. That is why fourth industrial revolution technologies and geospatial technology is essential for achieving energy transition within a plan. How geospatial and fourth industrial revolution technologies can help in energy transition? So we know that energy sector, in energy sector, the only thing more ubiquitous than the sun is location. So location is the most common thing, and we know that like by integrating this with technologies such as IoT, AI/ML, 5G, cloud computing, edge computing, we can help energy transition by these methods. So first method is by creating a smart grid and also inculcating grid modernization. So this will basically help in creating a two-way communication between its customer as well as the utility. And this will help in reducing the downtime. So by reducing the downtime, we will increase the efficiency during peak demand hours. And also it will increase the security and reduce the operation as well as management costs for utilities and infrastructure. And ultimately, it will lower the cost of power for consumer. The second thing is mobile data collection and remote monitoring of renewable resources. So by that we mean that we no longer have to reach or physically be present at each and every location of a utility and do inspection. So we can remotely do these with the help of satellite imageries, lidar data, as well as our drone imageries. And also these auto and these inspection can be automated to a great extent, so they further save cost as well as time, and in that manner it also helps in reducing the overall carbon footprint. The third thing is the spatiotemporal energy data and embedded based location intelligence for demand allocation. So by using when we are using multiple IoTs and multiple sensors, it creates a data lake. And using that data lake, we can actually gather notable insights that too in real time. So for example, we can make use of TinyML, which can be used to develop and deploy microcontrollers which have outage prediction algorithm. And within that, with very less amount of RAM and computing power, it can truly provide a feedback, which is totally in real time. And then last but not the least, we have our sustainable energy planning, which in essence means focusing on technical, economical, geographical, and institutional aspects in order to carry out any sustainable development. And keeping in mind the energy transition aspects, uh, as well as to shift away from single sector thinking and move into a coherent and integrated understanding. Now, at present, how amalgamated geospatial technology and industrial revolution technology, industrial revolution technology are. So, while we know that location is the key essence for planning and monitoring, it requires power in form of various measures to actually form a disruptive solution. One such example is basically the use of IoT, big data, and 5G to create a digital twin. And this digital twin has made possible, using the geodata models as well. It has made possible for urban designers, government, and citizens to extensively visualize, plan, and process anything before it happens on the ground. So hence, it creates a solid spatial decision support system. The next thing is AI and cloud compute are helping in creating a holistic site planning, that is from initial site suitability analysis to site identification, and further to that particular site selection. That is made possible by our AI algorithms, our deep learning algorithms, as well as GIS and remote sensing techniques. Then the third is predictive maintenance, DL-based predictive maintenance of various renewable sources, such as our photovoltaic cells or our wind turbine. So by using these, we can identify whether a particular turbine or whether a particular PV cell is inefficient, and we can, in early stage, find out these. And so again, by using something like TinyML, we can actually rectify any error that it might be having, or anything that might cause it to go in downtime. And the last is by making use of data from various sensors, such as smart grids, and coupling it with the use of location intelligence, we can actually not monetize, but optimize the workforce of clean energy workforce as well as clean energy sources, such that it is such that we can allocate the demand in a manner wherever the peak is happening or wherever there is a lesser demand. So demand allocations and workforce allocation can be done in that manner. Now that we have talked about the benefits and challenges, let's look at some actual cases where geospatial technology is being used. So over here, we have taken the use case of geospatial in solar PV management. We are here at extensively working on this particular subject. And so basically, it involves identifying a site for solar panel, and using various geodata, we do that. And once we have done identification of a suitable site, we basically create a digital twin, and further using additional geodata such as global horizontal irradiance and various other factors like sun angle, sun shadow. We create a digital twin and identify the potential of that PV. And once we have a solid location as well as a solid potential of a particular solar PV park, we basically at a later stage we add sensors and IoTs in that, and using those sensor and IoTs, we create a dashboard which basically tells us about the efficiency as well as the power output that each cell is producing. So we can easily monitor. So over here, if we look at here, we can actually see, this is an example, but we can see the things like performance ratio, energy yield, and the production capacity. So this can help in smart grid integration as well. So wherever there is higher demand, we can actually transfer the energy to that particular location. And further, using this dashboard, we are doing predictive analysis. So this is being done in two forms. One is using ML and tiny ML. Based on machine learning algorithms and deep learning algorithms, we are getting to know about in real time which particular power voltaic cell is not performing well. And also by using thermal drones, we are able, and by using those thermal drones, we can actually identify based on the heat intensity, which one is not performing in a better manner. And thus this helps us in making the whole plant much more efficient and much more like we can increase its efficiency. And this data is also fed into the smart grid, wherein further based on if we have found out some fault or some we know that there is going to be a downtime in some area, we can actually allocate the power from that one particular source to a different source. Then another use case is use of geospatial and 4IR in EV charging stations. So we know like almost 60 to 70% of EV charging stations are currently sourcing energy from coal grid. So in essence, they are not very like eco-friendly. So after doing some analysis and finding out the clean energy grids, so basically the grids which are sourcing energy from wind power or solar power, we try to inculcate the EV V2V and V2G technology, which basically means vehicle to vehicle communication and vehicle to grid communication. The reason for doing this is, like, let's say we have a range anxiety for one particular vehicle which maybe is having 10 or 20 kilometers of charge left. Then that particular vehicle can actually communicate with other vehicle in its vicinity using 5G spatial information as well as IoTs to get charge from that particular vehicle if there is no charging station available nearby to its location. And also some vehicles which are having like a greater capacity of charging, they can actually donate their charging, or they can actually discharge their electricity to that particular EV station and help others in a form wherein basically it can increase the efficiency, and thus it will decrease the CO2 emission. So one such example over here that we can see is, like, there is a particular vehicle which is having some amount of energy. So it has through V2G and G2V communication, it has discharged some amount of energy in a smart grid, and that smart grid is basically sending its power to a different energy storage system, which is basically further helping in increasing the efficiency by allocating it to a location where it is more needed. So what's next? Now we have talked about, like, what is geospatial technology and what is the role of fourth industrial revolution technology in energy transition. But how can we be a part of this transition, and how can we do it right from our home? So we know that although satellite image, although geospatial technology is being used for a benefit of the energy transition, but at some locations and at some point, it is also being used where because of which mines or maybe locations are getting exploited, such as this one particular mine. So how we can help save our environment, and how we can help protecting this ecological part, that is through the use of our phone. So our phone is having raw material which can actually be used in wind turbines and our EV charging station. So wind turbines require neodymium, which is a strong magnet, and that is being sourced from a particular mine in China. So it is getting overexploited, and thus to basically make it more efficient and make it more holistic, we can create a network of recycling and collection from home, which could be powered by location intelligence, then big data analytics, 5G, cloud computing, and IoT. And these all can combine and create a network which can basically source these can source metals like neodymium, lithium, and cobalt from our phones, as well as our various computing systems. So in essence, we have a walking mine in our pocket. So once it's not in use, we can definitely be a part of energy transition by recycling it. And by that, I will end my presentation and open to any questions.
Abhishek, thank you very much indeed for that insight, and especially for some of the sort of use cases that you presented there about how geospatial can support certain aspects of energy transition. Now, I'm very aware of time here, and there has been a small conversation going on in the meeting chat, but I do want to ask one question of each of our presenters as I sort of close this session. And I want to do it in a sense following the discussion in the chat and picking up some of the things. But we've had some insight from all our panelists today. Alberto's really talked about some modelling that helps us look, very much to the future about how things are going to change, and of course, very focused in this case on one of our foundation data sets, meteorological data. Abhishek's talked about quite heavily about some of today's technology, some of today's methods, using today's technologies to really understand and help with energy transition. Aurangzeb's really talked about a number of things, but in particular, I was taken by the increasing use of space-based data. And there's a whole conversation, actually, not for now, to have about underground carbon capture and how geospatial can support that, and the geological information and so on and so forth. But that, I'm afraid, we'll have to wait for another day. And Carsten focused on the absolute need for innovation, which I think, in a sense, brings together all that the other speakers had talked about. It's continuing innovation between the geospatial sector and indeed the energy sector to try and look for new ways to help us. And that brings me on to the subject of the question, really, which was about collaboration. Because all of our panelists have talked about collaboration and how important it is to success. And I'd just like to ask each of you as we close whether you think there is enough collaboration between industries and government, between the geospatial community and the wider energy sector, whether that collaboration is happening, and if not, what you think could be done to increase that collaboration. And I'll go round in the same order that we presented. So perhaps, Carsten, your views first.
Yeah, thank you, John. So I think there is collaboration. Whether there's enough, well, it's a little bit difficult to benchmark. But I think what I would like to say and start with is that kind of if you come from a strong geospatial background, you don't necessarily have a great deal of knowledge in the energy market, and perhaps the other way around. I think that's kind of the case whenever kind of two different industries collide, if you like. So I think I was quite impressed by Zeb's presentation, because I think you're obviously coming from an energy perspective, but you were you talked about geospatial technology and their potential quite well. So I think that was quite powerful, really. So I think there's a need to talk and a need for knowledge exchange, and to kind of pick up the language, pick up some key concept, and kind of once you're over this barrier, then collaboration, well, between industries is a little bit easier. But I think fundamentally, collaboration is about aligning to a common goal and a common outcome. And I think I would hope that the overall train towards net zero, and then the certain sub themes that we touched on, will provide enough of this alignment in terms of goals that are arguably generally in the public good, which might still be interpreted slightly different by different players in the market, that we can come to an arrangement and an understanding, a joint understanding, so we can all really push our pole into the same direction, which I think is really the starting point. And then technology is very powerful these days, and I think it will follow once we know how once we've agreed how we want to utilize it.
Yeah, which is very, very interesting, because one of the questions in the chat was what comes first, effectively, the data or the technology, and actually they work together. The key thing, as you say, is what's the problem we're trying to solve, and how do we bring those two things to solving that problem. Alberto, can I ask you about your views on what more we can do on collaboration to help with energy transition?
Right. Yeah. So I guess Gaston already said quite a bit about collaboration. Of course, it depends on the goal that we set ourselves. What kind of communities we want to bring in, and where we put the boundaries is always critical. To just be too broad. There's always a risk to be too broad, and then nothing really happens. And you're too narrow, and then the opposite happens. There's a very small community. So I think there's no recipe for this. You just need to find a good balance as usual, and trying to bring enough people in the community and assess the goals. Our organization, the World Energy Meteorology Council, actually started with the goal to bring together the climate and weather community, mainly from academia, and the energy community on the other side, which is a two side of the coin, just to make sure that the best knowledge from academia and weather and climate is used by the industry. And that's what we're trying to do. We've had several projects, that European projects particularly, that work on that, and the one that I mentioned also for under Copernicus. But then, you find that there's always something better that you can do better. And there is a lot of talk, for example, in our community about co-production, and setting the kind of the structure for how this co-production should work, down to the theory. You just have how the co-production should work in practice. And I think even that, it's a bit pushing too much. I mean, in practice, what we want to do is to go down to the traditional way of talking to people, and engage with people who can do that best. And then you can write so many books about how co-production should work. If you don't have the right people and the right goal in mind, nothing is ever achieved. So that's yeah.
Yeah, no, that thank you, Alberto. And I think you and Carsten have both talked about real collaborative projects, in a sense. So not just the talking, but trying to achieve something through some cooperative working, which is actually a really important step. And I'd like to turn now to Aurangzeb, because from the other side of the coin, how do you see yourself reaching out and collaborating with the wider geospatial community to increase that collaboration that perhaps breaks down some of the boundaries and takes us forward innovatively?
No, that's a good question, John. I guess if I'm to couch the geospatial technologies under the umbrella of, say, clean energy technologies for the context that I'm speaking in, decarbonization really, just for simplicity's sake, I would say that, I mean, collaboration is happening, and we see it, of course, at the IEF. It's a global platform for energy dialogue. So we see that government-to-government collaboration. The tricky part, I think, is that when we talk about energy transition, we see it as this linear kind of direction with one formula fits all type of concept, which it isn't. I think every country and every government is dealing with the energy transition in its own way. It'll take its own path, which is why I opened with, the energy transition is going to be multidimensional, multifaceted, and different for different countries. Hence why we have, different timelines for these net zero strategies. I do think that having these targets in place, whether it's 2050, 2060, 2070, I mean, it's a start. Implementation is always going to have different variables for different governments and for different countries. How we can continue that collaboration on multiple levels. So of course we deal with the government-to-government collaboration, country-to-country collaboration, but within those countries, the public-private partnerships, the collaboration with other stakeholders. Like I talked about public acceptance. That's going to be very important, especially when it comes to investing in these big projects to increase efficiency, for instance, for power plants or for CCUS, as I mentioned. This is going to require a lot of public support. So, there has to be collaboration there. A collaboration with the banks, of course, when it comes to creative financial instruments to get these projects underway. For example, governments, take an equity stake and then kind of seed that stake to private partners as the projects develop. And this includes, of course, geospatial technologies and satellite technologies, how we can kind of further build and go forward. But I think, basically what it's coming down to is we're seeing, based on what the scenarios say and what the forecasts say, energy demand is increasing. We have to balance that somehow. Clean energy technologies is one of the answers to that. And collaboration, of course, has to continue on the government-to-government level, but also at the local level. And I think that's important just because energy transition is just so specific to the experiences of a country, and there will be checkpoints along the way for reevaluation as we continue to move forward.
Joy, you're on mute.
Thank you, Ruben. No, thank you very much. I want to just finally turn to Abhishek for his views, picking up a point that Aurangzeb made about sort of local collaboration. And I think, here technologies being a global company, how do you pursue this local national collaboration as opposed to the sort of corporate collaboration internationally, big picture?
I think the first thing is within the organization and within at a local community, people need to be sensitive towards the environment. So there is a need to inculcate the sensitivity and the creative knowledge towards the renewable energy sources as well as transition. And I think that is happening if I talk about India, that is happening to some degree, but it is taking a linear method. But I think it should be in exponential form based on the CO2 emissions that we are seeing. And obviously, so corporates need to invest more. They need to, again, think in different sectors. So they don't need to be focused toward a single channel or a single sector. They need to look into the various sectors, how in each of those sections can they reduce their emissions, or they can make anything more efficient. So I think these are the key things that will help, and obviously these collaborations are much more needed at a not only on the local scale but also on a international and country level scales. John, you are on mute.
I am. I'm trying to stay silent here. There's a question just arisen, which I'm going to close with a view on this particular session. And the question is around: should there be a common platform where policymakers and geospatial community come together to try and tackle issues like this? And I would say that the United Nations in 2018 held its first United Nations World Geospatial Information Congress, which was aiming to do that sort of idea, bringing policymakers and the geospatial community together. The next edition of that Congress takes place in Hyderabad in October 2022. So that is a platform in the sense of a policy platform, trying to bring those policymakers and geospatial community together. Not specifically for energy, but across the sustainable development goals. And of course, the energy transition helps us towards those too. I'd like to thank all four of our panelists for their contributions this afternoon. It's been very interesting listening to all of you. It's a shame that we didn't have more time for conversation. I've already eaten into everyone's time this afternoon, but I'd like to now hand over to Ruben to continue the afternoon's work. But once again, thank you very much indeed to Carsten, to Alberto, to Aurangzeb, and to Abhishek for your excellent contributions this afternoon. Ruben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all the speakers of session 1 for the insightful session. So now we will be commencing the session on collaboration and business models for energy transition. The energy sector has traditionally functioned in silos, with several stakeholders of the ecosystem competing against each other. In order to thrive through the energy transition, decarbonization, and green energy adoption, the silos needs to be toned down, and old rivalries should give way to new ecosystem partnerships. No single person or organization will be able to deal with the different elements of energy transition and collaboration as the way forward to meet the net zero targets and decarbonization goals, thereby making sure everyone becomes a player in the energy transition. This session on collaborations and business models will just focus on the current state of collaboration in the energy ecosystem, the current and future areas of collaboration, the types of collaboration and business models, and the requirements for improving geospatial knowledge collaboration. We have 4 speakers as part of this session. After the individual presentations from each speaker, we will have a panel discussion with all the speakers of the session where questions from the audience will be answered by the speakers. I would like to request the participants in the audience to type their questions for the speakers in the chat box and make this an interactive session. Without further ado, I would now like to welcome our first speaker of the session, Charlene Becky, CEO of Clem Geoenergy Corp, a renewable energy firm specializing in wind energy and hybrid project developments. Charlene has 18 years of experience in the oil industry and is a strong advocate of clean energy. Charlene, the floor is yours.
Hello. Hi there. Welcome to this session. I'm just going to get my slideshow started here. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you. Just start at the beginning. So hi, I'm Charlene Becky, and I'm a renewable energy expert and developer from Canada. Welcome to this session today. I'd like to speak to you about the collaboration and business models in the energy transition. So my topics for discussion today include Clem Geoenergy Corp, my background and experience, what is happening now and why it's so important to understand the energy transition, business models, geospatial data integration, collaboration strategies, and the Clem Geo offerings. So I spent about 18 years in the oil industry, with the majority of my time spent working as a geophysicist and in the IT sector. So I'm very familiar with geospatial data. I've used many sources of geospatial data throughout my career. I started my own company in 2014 and embarked on entrepreneurial path in utility scale renewable energy developments in 2016. I challenged myself to learn all that I can about creating projects in the energy transition. Since then, we have 5 projects in development across Canada, ranging from 40 to 140 megawatts in size. We've also been involved in export markets and have done some proposals in the Caribbean and Latin America, and more recently have been involved in European markets. I have completed my post-secondary degrees in psychology and business, geophysics, and more recently attained a Master's of Engineering with a focus on the environment. Some of my organizational affiliations include APEGA, DEC, and I am on the executive of the CFUW Calgary, which is an organization that works with governments and local contacts to help improve human rights in terms of access to education, pay equity, clean environments, and in the elimination of violence. Oh, apologize. Too much clicking. So what is happening now? Why has this topic become so important? Many of us here know that we are trying to reach net zero with an intent to reduce harmful emissions into the atmosphere and to achieve a balance. The Glasgow Climate Pact that was signed last month was to help address the issue of climate change and limit the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. It's amazing how much has changed on this earth in the past 100 years. I often think about the devastation that we have caused as we seek out a better life and manage increased populations. There are solutions out there now that can help us meet the growing population's needs while doing a better job of reducing and hopefully eliminating pollution. Commitments to the pact include finance for climate adaptation and mitigation. There's also renewed focus on capacity building and emission reduction and cleaner transportation, halting and reversing deforestation, a boost in cooperation over climate strategies, and a commitment for annual meetings to monitor and measure progress and commitment by countries. This is all of these aspects are important from a geospatial perspective. Here we look at the global emissions as presented by the UN. We not only have to look at to a chart like this to understand who the large emitters are, but we also must examine the causes. The global demand for products that are made in China, for example, have continued to grow over the years, and we are now encroaching on over 300 billion years in sales. You can now imagine the emissions in the supply chain and distribution of products alone, not including the production of the products themselves. So who is affected? It is most vulnerable societies who are severely impacted by climate extremes, which result in economic issues and reduced quality of life from the climate crisis. This has caused negative effects on food and water security, agriculture, infrastructure, energy, health, business, and tourism, as well as well-being. We should not only introduce blame, as we are all responsible for life on this earth and a certain standard of living. Systems that are detrimental to our existence must be revisited to find new, less damaging solutions. There's also a whole socioeconomic aspect to climate change that we all must be aware of. So what can we do? We can start to create unique plans for companies, communities, and countries. First, we must build effective business models. This includes many steps such as research, data integration, understanding solutions that are available, developing business and local networks, and understanding markets. It's also important to scale your projects accordingly, learn from your mistakes, and celebrate milestones. Measure your progress and keep it fun. So this is a business model of everything that I do in my business to make a project successful. It includes site access, land rights, electrical interconnection, modeling in either the solar or wind space, financial aspects, and equipment transportation to site, and of course, making the projects operational. So business considerations. First, we have to look at the resource. Is the resource measurable, accurate, reliable, and bankable? You need to have bankable resource at the end of the day to be able to get the financing that you need. Interconnection, how far are we away from interconnection points, and do we understand the available capacity for the projects? Is it servicing the need, and who are the energy purchasers? Where is the energy needed the most? In terms of environmental impact, we have to look at what we're affecting in terms of ground and who's around us, what type of animals and things can be measured directly off the ground, and how can that be captured in terms of reports and setbacks. In terms of economics and community, you have to look at who you're impacting when you're building these projects, and also how you can utilize economics to understand both the planning and the capital needs that are necessary for the different stages of the projects. Engineering considerations include planning, design, scheduling, procurement, construction, and balance of plants. You need to have a workable project that makes sense for the area that you're working in. You also need to know who is going to buy your power. Are you in a regulated or deregulated market? Are you going to participate in a request for proposals with a utility or find a local off-taker? Can you sell your environmental attributes on top of your energy sales price? In every country, these aspects are different, and even within countries. There's a need to reduce regulatory and supply chain delays and access to financing. You should include supports from government and regulatory bodies. Geospatial data is important in the planning stage and in open data sharing, which will help to move the industry forward. There's also a need for local business networks and reliable infrastructure to support projects. The main goal is to reduce risk and build successful projects. So from a geospatial data perspective, we need data in all aspects of your business. Initially, we use it for preliminary planning, resource assessment, and mapping and planning for all stages of interconnection, environment, engineering, and community. All of these have to come together to make decisions for companies and projects. There is a place in economics for more accurate predictions. Power purchase agreements are important to be able to bring suppliers and consumers together. Pre and post evaluations need to be done in order to understand the business impact. Originally, it was very difficult to find and navigate data that made sense or had fine enough grid to do project-based studies. More recently, there's more databases that are available, but often it's hard to access the data itself. Compared to the oil and gas industry, where these data sets were very well developed, it was a struggle to utilize available databases on a single system and to find data that was both consistent and easy to use. Having more consistent databases will help the industry to do better planning and be more successful. So how can data help? I mean, there's a lot of ways that data can help. Most of it will be initially in the planning and reaching successful engagements and goals. Some of the publicly available databases that are available today that have actually become available just very recently include the Vaisala wind and solar maps, which are more global perspective, RE Data Explorer, which we're just starting to use, the Wind and Solar World Atlas, which is something that we use regularly, and WindDesk Discover. And of course, in this session, we've learned about a couple more databases that are in the works. So collaboration from a business perspective. Collaboration is so important to effectively executing a business model. It may be both strategic and worthwhile to reach out to government personnel, industry, universities, and other experts. Each will bring different perspectives and approaches to reaching goals and can introduce relevant and current information to reduce project risk. Certain of these groups can also help with financing obligations and project scaling. Providing education and empowering individuals should also be a part of this collaboration. Collaboration from a data perspective can involve the same or similar groups to provide accessible data, create standards and quality controls for accuracy of data, and to use at all scales. We need to educate people on data usage and coordination. Building interactive databases to report, guide, and show industry progress, especially in the areas of installed capacity and projects, clean fuels, land-based and marine programs are so important. To do before and after analysis to highlight positive changes that are happening at different levels to help attract accelerated change will also be part of the solution. Remember, it's not a competition. We're all in this together to diversify our economy and create a global energy transition. So what does my company do? Comgeo Energy Corp builds utility scale projects, but we're also involved as consultants in assessing clean energy solutions for ports and communities and can provide training in the area of renewable energy and sustainable practices. In my work, we've touched on small scale and utility scale projects, transmission infrastructure and planning, cleaner energy solutions, strategy planning, conceptual models, and empower and training individuals. We've also learned more recently about other solutions in the transitional economy, including recycling, water filtrations, tailings cleanup, hydrogen and alternate fuels, carbon capture, energy storage, electric and hydrogen electric vehicle infrastructure, and waste to energy. So in summary, effective business models and collaboration are key. The energy transition will lead to creating jobs, energy independence and resilience, long-term energy generation, improved health, and a cleaner environment. Best in practice improvements are needed for the energy transition and must keep humanity and biodiversity in mind. It would even be wonderful to address the greatest need areas from a geospatial data perspective. There are already ready-to-use technologies that are available on the market, and their efficiencies will improve over time. Remote data sources have been usable on websites, but access to knowing where new innovations are coming from is important. We can't attend every webinar or conference as business entrepreneurs, so we have to understand what is most effective for project developments. High quality global geospatial data can be used in all aspects of the business model. Transitions require dedication, education, sensible business models, relevant data sets, and collaboration at all levels, especially as we consider the global scale. Thank you so much for your time, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Sally, for sharing your insights on the various business considerations and collaboration strategies for the energy sector. I would now like to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Martin Coopers, Energy Modeler at International Energy Agency. He's the industry modeler for the World Energy Outlook and geospatial data expert for energy access topics in Africa. Martin, the floor is now yours.
Thanks a lot to Ruben, and thanks a lot to Geospatial World and all the presenters today for this very interesting exchange. I would like to give some insights today about geospatial data in the IEA, how we use it in global energy scenarios and reports. I will share my slides. Okay, so in general, I would like to start giving a short overview on the IEA. The IEA works globally with governments and industry to shape a secure and sustainable energy future for all. It was founded as a reaction in 1974 to the oil crisis to provide a sustainable, secure oil supply globally, but developed to a very all fuels, all technologies approach. Has approximately 300 staff members from over 40 countries and is based in Paris. So I'm speaking in Paris today. And there's four major areas that we work in. It's energy security, economic development, environmental awareness, and engagement worldwide. So we try to analyze everything around the energy sector, but also its impacts on economic developments, on job creation, many topics we heard today, and derive policy recommendations from there. I would like to start my overview. I think we've heard that already a lot today, but with the COP outcomes and general scenarios we foresee for the future, just to open the place in which we put our geospatial analysis. So usually we analyze several scenarios. The first one is the stated policy scenarios in blue, which considers all policies that are already in place in concrete laws by government. And with this scenario, we reach a target of 2.6 degrees. So way too much for the 1.5 target. Then we have the announced pledges scenario, which considers all announced pledges that are done by governments, for example, net zero pledges, but they are not in binding policies yet. And we have actually updated this announced pledges scenario after COP, and which has shown a reduction below the 2 degree, below a 2 degree outcome. Especially by the global methane pledge, which was also mentioned this afternoon, and also the India net zero target. So those two had an effect on our announced pledges scenario. And our target scenario is the net zero emissions scenario, which basically shows a possible pathway how the global energy system could develop to a net zero emissions. In all those scenarios, or for our analysis in reports and everything, we also use geospatial data. And for that, I would like to present some examples now. But before giving the playing field in which we are in, so the IEA provides analysis, data, and policy recommendations. So we are a very data-driven organization, and that means that visualization of data is an important aspect for us. We have reports, global reports such as the World Energy Outlook or our Net Zero by 2050 report this year, many other reports which analyze a lot of data, try to derive policy recommendations from there. And therefore, data and data visualization is key in our recommendations. That's why geospatial data is mainly used in our application, of course, once for energy related topics and also in maps supporting important messages. We have several examples how we use geospatial data. We can do pure data analysis. We can combine different layers to do extended data analysis. We also use geospatial data to feed them in our actual energy models and to process them afterwards, or also for capacity building. And for those examples, I would like to go through several maps from our reports, show some highlights which with respect to the energy transition, and then conclude. The first example is offshore wind, which is, of course, one very important topic for the energy transition to provide stable electricity generation globally. And what this map actually shows is, on the one side, how deep the water is close to the shores, and on the other side, how far away from the shore we are. And by that, it classifies the shores from this violet color to orange yellow. And also in a second layer, we have here the existing wind turbines. And of course, what is the most the best solution for wind parks is to be not in very deep water to avoid high costs for the foundations and everything, and not to be too far from the shore to avoid high costs for interconnections. And to combine those two layers, or by combining those two layers, we can then identify good potential for further wind offshore expansions. A second example is hydrogen. Hydrogen is another very important element of our net zero by 2050 roadmap. But hydrogen, and especially the production of hydrogen without emissions, without gas emissions, is very dependent on the local characteristica. And this is shown in this map. Here we basically described how much 1 kilogram of hydrogen costs in different locations of the world. And this hydrogen is generated by an electrolysis, And before this, the electricity for this electrolysis is generated by solar PV and onshore wind systems. So it's renewable electricity going in an electrolysis and generating green hydrogen. And the map shows very clearly that areas such as especially in Chile with first good solar conditions, but also very good wind conditions are very well suited for the production of green hydrogen. Also the south of Africa, Namibia, South Africa, with excellent solar conditions, or Australia. Many markets that are often used in the global discussion of green hydrogen are indicated on this map. And it shows how the combination of different geospatial layers can help to develop recommendations where best markets for green hydrogen production are. The third example is also related to the energy transition, and an important aspect of it's the mining assets of critical minerals. In this map is from our critical minerals report, which was published this year, and analyzes in detail the role of critical minerals in energy transitions. And here we wanted to highlight, first of all, the location of copper and lithium mines, which are both very minerals that are very dependent on water. And then as a second layer, we showed the water stress of regions worldwide. And basically combining those two layers shows that many of the mines are very close to regions with water stress, which could put at risk the mining, which requires new solutions, and which is a topic to be addressed in the global discussion to ensure water supply also for critical minerals mining regions. Those were 3 examples from reports. Now I would like to go into a bit more detail for another specific topic where we use geospatial data, which is electrification in Africa. And here, first I have a map from our Africa Energy Outlook in 2019. And what we basically did here is using many different layers of geospatial data plus a dedicated model to calculate how the current population that is not electrified can be granted access to electricity in a least cost way. To reach the 100% access to electricity by 2030, which is one of the Sustainable Development Goals. And basically, this model uses the solar radiation, the existing grid, the population density, also income structure, and many more geospatial layers. And the idea is to combine those into the model and decide whether the grid needs to be extended to provide access, or mini grids have to be built, or standalone solar home systems are used as a least cost solution. And this can be used to support governments in their planning process, but it can also be used to get into discussions with mini grid or standalone system companies to kind of provide them an orientation for the market size. And what is very interesting here is that actually 2/3 of the 530 million people that additionally need access until 2030 are granted access by decentralized solution, which means mini grids and standalone systems in our Africa case scenario, which is actually the scenario assuming high economic development. So again, here, geospatial data is very helpful and is even processed not only in a pure data analysis, but in a separate model to feed into our analysis. This model was done in cooperation with KTH in Stockholm. It's the onset model, which is also publicly available and which also helps us to update our analysis, to rerun them. So having a publicly available code there is very helpful. Going a bit more into detail into the Africa topic, we also have another project very dedicated to geospatial data. It's called Data-Driven Electrification in Africa program, supported by Power Africa, a US agency funding this project. And it's basically divided in two work packages. The general idea is to work together very closely with 3 selected countries and to support them in building up capacities, in enabling them using geospatial data to improve their pathway to universal access. So all questions around having the geospatial data in place, using the geospatial data for access planning, providing tools for this access planning or for filling data gaps they currently face is part of this program. And the first part of the program is really focused on identifying gaps. So we are currently in this phase doing interviews with the countries, finding out what data they already have, what challenges they concretely face, but also on the other side, getting an overview of the general trends in the access planning community globally, and to identify gaps which are really there for countries in access planning. And then the second part is more detailed on the capacity building, but also building up a tool for the countries that they can actually use. We collaborate here with MIT in Cambridge to develop a tool that can help the countries directly, that can use their particular data they already have in place, and to also in the end train them on this tool we develop, but also on the other side to train them on geospatial data in general, to use the results of the first phase to improve their knowledge of geospatial data, and in the end to make it more useful also for the task of universal access planning. I would like to conclude all these examples with a short summary. So in general, geospatial data is able to support insights on details of the energy transition in our reports, and in the end, to improve policy design. Of course, for us, especially a comprehensive visualization helps us here. Mostly we use a combination of different geospatial data layers, combine them, analyze them. It's more than just a pure visualization, but more an analysis of data. And we also have a specific focus on access to electricity by analyzing least cost pathway assessments or doing this dedicated data-driven electrification project. What we see as challenges from our side is, first of all, the availability of geospatial data across countries. The availability can vary very much between different countries. And since we mostly do global reports, we are very dependent on the global availability of data. Also, the data quality is very different between countries. And also puts a risk at the quality of the analysis. And then the third point is the geospatial capacity. This is, for example, one aspect in our data-driven electrification project, to have the capacity in the countries also, to use actually the data, to be trained on the data, to be trained on the tools, to have licenses for it. Those are challenges we see in here. With this, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to answer any questions.
Thank you, Martin, for sharing your thoughts on the various use cases of geospatial technology adoption in energy transition. Our next speaker in the session is Elspeth McIntyre, Senior Geospatial Consultant at Atkins. She has over 9 years of experience in the AEC industry in a variety of roles. Elspeth is currently the geospatial lead for projects in digital EIA, net zero, transportation, and environment at Atkins. Elspeth, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ruben. Yes, as you see, I work for Atkins, which is an engineering and design consultancy. You may well have heard of it. We are one of the largest consultancies in the world serving these kinds of projects. But just to give you an idea of what consultant really does, We've got a team of around 90 geospatial professionals based in the UK and in Bangalore. The context of this is really important for understanding how we then address the energy transformation, because we do have all of these experts. We've got consultants, we've got geomatic specialists, software developers, we've even got some drone pilots in the team. We've got a lot of people with different types of expertise, and we're specialists in the analysis and the management of data, to solve problems, to provide answers, and in general to keep track of assets, whether that's in a digital twin format or anything else. Our staff take part in various different industry-wide measures. So we've got the ISO BIM GIS working group members as part of our team. We've also got the ICE Geospatial Engineering panel and the IEMA Special Interest Group member as well, as part of our team. I'll just share my screen here to give you an idea of all these different roles that we fulfill. With the IEMA group, with Digital EIA, we work in particular with a lot of different professionals across the environmental sphere. So thinking about the energy transition in light of all of these different groups and in light of all of these different skills, you start to understand how we can help and how the rest of the geospatial sector can help as well. And that's primarily because of the complexity of the energy transition challenge. We've heard about all the different areas in which various different specialists are inputting their expertise from the different speakers. But to get to the ground truth of it for the geospatial side, it's a complex challenge and it has multiple sectors. But between all these different sectors, whether that's transportation, whether it's energy, whether it's behaviour, whether it's biodiversity, the actual only unifying factor for these different sources of data and for the different languages and vocabulary of the specialists who manage their individual areas, location is the only unifying factor. So it's really, really important for us to get involved in this challenge and to talk to our clients as consultants like myself and the rest of my team in a very specific way. So I would say there's probably 3 challenges for us as geospatial specialists and as consultants when we look to the energy transition. And that is kind of a common problem regardless of which sector we're addressing, whether it is providing consultancy services for an offshore wind farm, which is one of our kind of bread and butter tasks, whether it's an energy master plan for a city, which is what I do a lot of on a kind of daily basis, or whether it's looking at something really, really specialist like a natural capital provision within a region and looking at areas where you can provide, for example, upstream flood management for water areas. So these 3 challenges are the ones that I'm passing on to the audience today, and I would hope that we see a lot more of. So your first challenge is to use data to focus on insights. I see a lot of solutions provided within the net zero market where data has been provided, but it's not pointing to insights. And our job as consultants is to then use that data to provide information that decision makers can use. And the data I'm showing on screen is an illustration of that. So you can see some areas of solid colour and other areas which have a hatch symbology across them. This data comes from energy performance certificates, which in the UK are provided based on an assessment of a property at any point in which the tenancy changes. So maybe you rent a new flat, or if you buy a new property as well, so buying a house. That certificate will tell you whether your property is rated at a certain energy efficiency. So you might be grade C, and then it will give you an idea of how your property could improve. So if you put various different wall insulations, ceiling insulations, improve your windows R value, then you will get to a higher energy performance grade. So from C to A, for example. For local energy master planning clients, which generally are councils in the UK, we translate this data into a usable format. So what you can see here with the overlay of the 2 layers, this solid colour on the base is the average energy performance grade for properties in that postcode area, so around 500 people, say. The hatching across it shows the potential energy grade which people in those postcodes can reach on average. The solid colour ones do actually show both of those layers, the current and the potential, but because there is no change in those energy grades, they appear as a solid colour. For a decision maker who's got the money to spend on improving houses or contributing to social housing for people in fuel poverty, that indicates that these solid coloured areas, like the orange in the middle, are not worthwhile to change because they won't have a very high benefit once that change has been made. To address the energy transition and to get towards net zero, the better ones to target are these ones with a really large colour differential. So this one in dark red is a background colour. That's got one of the worst average energy grades to start with. The potential grade it can reach is actually a C, which comparatively is much better. It's going to save a huge amount of carbon dioxide to upgrade the properties in this area rather than the orange above it where there's no change at all. So that's what we need. We need to take geospatial data and translate it into answers so that those people spending the money, making the decisions, know which choice to make. Second, we need to connect issues to get more actionable insights. So I've kept the data in the background pretty much the same in order to help your understanding of this. It's those energy performance certificates again, but instead of looking at a postcode area, they've actually been applied to the individual buildings. So again, we took the certificates, we matched them up with the addresses using various Ordnance Survey products. So thank you very much, Karsten, for those. And we now have an understanding of the square meter energy performance of each of those buildings based on their function. So are they industrial? Is it a large manufacturing plant or a warehouse? Is it a semi-detached house with an older couple living there? So we know the performance of the buildings, but we're actually connecting them up. You can see red lines on the map as well. These red lines are the transport pathways, and the thicker the red line indicates the greater amount of carbon that's being produced by vehicles along those lines, and that's based on traffic flows. So we start to understand where people are travelling through this urban area and which might be the roads where you start to target with different measures to encourage use of active travel or encourage use of public transport. And then you can also see some very slim blue lines. These are sewers. Before I went into geospatial, I hadn't really thought that much about sewers. It's not actually an area of my life that gives me a great deal of excitement. However, once we start looking at it in an energy transition or a net zero perspective, you start to really see the potential. And what we did here was take the sewer data, compare it to the location of the worst performing or highest consuming properties, and then see whether the diameter of that sewer and the proximity of the sewer would allow for a sewer source heat pump. So taking the material that is flowing through the sewer, taking the residual heat that lies in it, and then using that to power and heat the home, which, as many of you will know, in Britain is really quite important through the winter. So that's what we're doing here. We're connecting all of these different issues: transport, energy performance, and then the auxiliary systems, the utilities, the weird things that you might not think of as related to energy transition, putting them into one space and allowing decision makers to start seeing the connections that can be made between them. Thirdly, use non-traditional data to understand behaviour. As a number of the speakers have noted, behaviour is a huge part of the puzzle when we look at energy transition, whether it is having people decide to turn their lights on at a particular time of day or do their washing overnight in order to get a lower tariff and potentially a lower carbon cost for that energy, or whether it's the fact that they could walk to school and take their kids there that way or use their bike rather than jumping in a car. So it's really important to start using non-traditional data because that's really the only way we can start to map behaviour. To give an idea of what that means, I looked at Edinburgh, which this data is showing, a few years ago, perhaps 5 or 6 years ago, and to map behaviour around the city, the only real data I had came from people counters. There were 10 people counters in Edinburgh. It's a large city. There is a lot of different roads, and I had 10 data points from which I could extrapolate where people were using cycles and walking around the city. That's not going to give you any kind of answer that you can actually use to promote active travel and to reduce the energy cost of transport around the city. What I have now and what I'm showing here is data that's almost live. It comes directly from Strava, which is a social network platform for people to upload their runs, their cycles, their swims, their really any kind of form of movement into the platform. It gives them a sense of achievement because they can map out how fast they've covered ground, whether they've run faster than the other guy who was behind them or anything like that. So they get a sense of satisfaction and a tracker for their exercise. In return, Strava collects the data and uses it in various different ways. It's not really been applied to the net zero problem before, but what we've done here is what I think is the first time it's been used actively to start making decisions in a local authority. So you can see all of these different tracks. The purple and the pink are the areas where there is most usage. And that's most usage for leisure in this case, but we could also look at commutes instead. We could look at where only women run or men run, and we could look at places which, for example, they only use active travel between 9 and 10 in the morning, so it's probably a morning commute. Or if it's at midnight and suddenly you need to start putting street lighting somewhere you hadn't thought of. So a lot of different potential from this non-traditional behaviour. And I'll show you now, as a wee quick case study, how that is impacted by geospatial analysis. So the screen you saw before had everything, all of the usage across the city. The screen you see here is much more bare, and that's because I've clipped away all of the running and cycling that was happening on either roads or paths. So now you can only see the pieces of exercise that are happening where there is no real facility for them. Admittedly, eagle-eyed viewers will have noticed there's a few different circles and oval shapes which are easily identifiable as indoor arenas or outdoor arenas. I believe Murrayfield is there for any rugby fans. But you'll also see lots of little tiny segments around which don't happen on paths or inside. And to give you a look at a particular segment here, this area is right on the edge of Edinburgh. So you've got the Firth of Forth, which is a large estuarine river. And this area toward the bottom of the screen actually borders onto quite a nice beach, which leads you to a fairly affluent area of Portobello. If you go to the north and you follow this pink line upward, you are in Leith, which is a fairly underprivileged area of Edinburgh. There's a lot of industrial margins, lots of large warehouses. It's an up and coming area, as we would see in Scotland. However, there's a lot of Strava activity right around this area. And that doesn't really make sense because there's maybe a metre wide of this kind of scrubby grass around the side of this facility. So we just didn't understand quite why anyone would want to run or cycle there. Particularly, as you can see, because this is actually a sewage plant. So returning to sewage, it's not going to be the most pleasant place to run. There is a smell here. You can't really avoid that when you're doing sewage treatment works. So people love this area. It's being used. It's a potential link between the beach, between Leith, and between some residential communities further round. And as an active travel solution, it could provide a really great commute route for cyclists around the city in a safe way off-road. And people love it, so they're going to start doing that in their leisure time as well. If they're using it already, if you put some more facilities there, think of the difference you can make. And just to prove our point, that data you were seeing was from before the pandemic. So it was people that kind of did have access to other green spaces that they could travel further afield for. However, in the pandemic in Scotland, we got locked down to our local authority areas. And suddenly we saw this story appear in the Guardian newspaper saying the sewage works reminded us of Sicily. And it was this particular sewage works that you've seen on screen where people suddenly had started walking there that wouldn't have done so before and saying, despite there being a sewage factory there, this is gorgeous. It's a peaceful place. It's away from the roads. You've got the water on the other side of you. This is somewhere I want to be, and I wish it was easier to access. So that's a change we're going to make. And we combined the recreational data with other layers to look at other natural capital ideas to see how we could improve the city for net zero aims and for general sustainability. And this red gridded structure here actually looks at the noise, air pollution, carbon sequestration, and habitat connectivity potential. So red means higher opportunity, so it's a place you can make a lot of change. If you combine that with the recreational angle, then you start to see this clear opportunity area which could be changed in Edinburgh. And what we've done here is result in a really meaningful outcome for the city, for users of the city, and for designers, decision makers for the next 10 years. They can come here and instead of seeing kind of multiple data layers, which they then have to analyze again and again, they've got this opportunity area, which we've provided the methodology for, and we've provided a really authoritative source for them to say, this is an area I want to change. I want to incorporate it into my net zero, my sustainability, my energy transition vision. and I'm going to go ahead with it. It makes it quick, makes it affordable, and it makes it achievable. So that's what we've got to do as geospatial specialists for the energy transition. We've got to help people make decisions so change gets made. And that's all from me actually, Ruben, so I will pass back over to you.
Thank you, Elspeth, for sharing your thoughts on connecting traditional and non-traditional data and issues to obtain insights, and also for providing this very interesting example regarding the application of geospatial to like help people. I would now like to welcome our last speaker of the session, Daniel Lazari, GIS specialist at ENGIE Brazil Energy. He is a geoprocessing and remote sensing specialist working on development of remote field monitoring systems for the implementation of power transmission lines and wind farms to provide project information, safety inspections, reports, and mandatory environmental inspections in real time. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Hello, hello
Hi.
everyone. So my name is Daniel Lazari, and I'm an environment engineer from Brazil and a GIS specialist. I worked for several years on the implementation of wind farms and solar energy projects and system of transmission lines. And I will share with you a few thoughts about how we have been applying geotechnology to face the challenge that we have in Brazil in the energy sector. Let me just share the presentation 1 second. Everyone can see it?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit through 4 topics, and hopefully I'll give some insights and brainstorming on the chapter 4 about the areas of collaboration that I think is the main goal of this section of the seminar. And in order to do that, I'll bring you to a reflection about the geographical challenge that we have here in Brazil for the energy sector. Also, the current state of the public geospatial infrastructure here in Brazil, the strengths and the weakness that we face in the nowadays. Later on, I will bring you an example of geomapping stakeholders in the private sector sites and how that methodology has been helping the enterprise in order to have a sustainable development around the communities in the poorest regions in Brazil. And later on, the conclusions, we're going to think about the future areas of collaboration that might improve the sustainable development of those projects. Okay, so why we have some challenges in Brazil for implemented energy projects? First, because the extension of our country is the 5th largest country in the world. We are only behind China, Canada, United States, and Russia. And that means that only talking about transmission line, we have more than 150,000 kilometers already implemented. Just to have a comparison, that would bring 3 times around the globe if only about linear projects. We have more than 7,000 power generation projects. And here I'm gonna request your Portuguese to help us understand the base of the energy sector in Brazil. And just kidding, I'm gonna translate for you guys. The major part, the 60%, is from hydropower, and wind power is about 80%, and fossil 15%. Solar energy we have around 1%. And the goals to the year of 2050, it would be have 20% of wind farms and around 10% of solar projects, and that's a big challenge. We have also more than 5,000 cities distributed in 26 states, with approximately 40% of all fresh water on the planet. and all the entire urban nets manifest itself in energy distribution networks. So the conclusion is that we have a great potential to use spatial analysis in order to solve the challenge of the project executions. That's where GIS comes on the table. Okay, so the current state of the public geospatial infrastructure in Brazil. In 2008, only in 2008, we had the creation of the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. The infrastructure catalog integrates and harmonizes geospatial data, but does not determine the criteria for spatial data production and metadata available to the users. That means that each state here in Brazil has their own rules about data production and distribute that data to the society. And the consequence of that is the poorest states, they have almost no data at all. And why that's a problem? Because of the non-centralized public geospatial data source. Only infrastructure, we have several agents that we must go, and some of them, they have WebGIS and they have a web service to share that content, but others, they don't have. On the social environment thematic, the challenge is biggest because of the extension of our country, we have a lot of challenge with archaeology, caves, and water resource, even land and settlement management. Even the only challenge of catalog all the properties in Brazil is a huge challenge, and that's impacted directly in the private sector too, on the development on the energy sector. So how we have been applying remote science to face those challenges? The National Institute for Space Research was created in 1961. We used several satellites to monitor land use, national satellites. I can bring attention to the last one, Amazonia 1. It was sent last year to use, and it focuses on itself to detect deforestation change. However, high-resolution satellite images with high frequency coverage of the Earth's surface are acquired from international companies or from other countries that have their own satellites. Due to the territorial size, high costs to create a land use and occupation monitor program by laser scanning through the airplanes or drones. So what's the solution that our government founded? Use satellites and AI, artificial intelligence. The map biomas was created by putting together non-governmental institutions, private institutions, and public institutions. It uses images from Landsat to track change from 1985 until nowadays. It provides public information for society and public institutions for monitoring deforestation, illegal possessions of areas, site illegal plant suppression, illegal mining, and others. It operates itself in the Google Earth Engine platform, so it's all on-the-fly process. The Map Biomas provides several alerts and indicators for work inspection and management of other public and private institutions. It provides annual land use and land cover maps in significantly cheaper, faster, and updated way, and that make it possible to recover the history of the last decades. So, the strengths of the Brazilian current state of public geospatial structures, we can bring as strengths the large collection of geospatial information. The use of national satellites provides greater autonomy in identifying change. The use on the fly processing and artificial intelligence to provide alerts to public and private sector. And through government research, it contributes to service in the private sector. But the weakness that we face, it does not have a centralized, organized, comprehensive, continuous, update, and easy accessible geospatial database. Each state determines the criteria for providing spatial data. Because of that, the poorest regions also suffer from the scarcity of quality data. The difficulty in territorial management with challenges such as the large amount of property to be registered, weather events affecting the energy sector, and the strong territorial conflict in traditional community areas. So here I will bring to you guys an example of geomapping stakeholders in private sector and how that has been helping the enterprise in have a daily routine around the community in order to have a quality well-being around it. So the geomapping stakeholder information and the correlation of this information have emerged as a tool to support stakeholder management control process, which enable graphical visualization to assist in decision making. The spatial distribution allows the agile identification of actors with high priority of attention, provide information about the distribution of stakeholders, identifying possible trends by groups or location. The data and information of stakeholders are introduced on the WebGIS platform. In addition to a map, you can extract graphs and dashboards or two. The next step is to associate these two with the platforms of Bing Data and business intelligence. By combining the filters and the layers in WebGIS, it's possible to visualize the qualification of stakeholders and areas with greater incidence and others and opportunities, such as more impacted region and also those with greater criticalities to development of the projects, as entities that could cause specific embargoes on the access of the sites, anticipating the identification of crucial situations with the interest parts. In addition, data collection and cross-referencing can support the company's social community plan, as well as indicating the best action through the work. Also, just specializing and qualifying the complaints and requests registered through the ombudsman channel of the sites and the projects. The use of online WebGIS platform also provides the democratization of stakeholders' information, allowing free access to other areas of interest in monitoring stakeholders' relations in real time, like managers, communications areas, social responsibility team, legal department, and others. So a positive example of the stakeholder engagement is Mariluz. Mariluz, she's an environmental activist and public employee of Saint-Sé, is a small city in the northeast of Brazil. She was identified in previous mapping and classified as stakeholders that has a great influence in other members of the community, institutions, and public bodies. Initially, Mariluz was moderate opposed to ANGI's projects in the region. Risky and opportunities associated with these stakeholders were characterized, and an action plan was established to ensure her engagement. So her association was involved in the activities of monitoring and preserving water source or water springs. So this action has built a relationship of trust and partnership with Mariluza and her community that she was born to. This attitude directly influenced other stakeholders in that and others local community, like Mr. Ezi, another community, greener community, and a lone owner that has a water springs on his properties. He went from an explorer of the water spring that degraded the riparian forest to protector and restorer of the water source, while having his environment conscience stimulated thanks to the activities of the program. The influence of Mariluz was essential to change the level of engagement of Mr. Z. So, what we can bring to the table, what we can think about the future areas of collaborations. One thing I should bring is bring climate environmental information to the table. Nowadays, we have a lot of almost real-time climate information, and that affected the operation of the projects on the energy sector. Here in Brazil, we have a lot of burning trees, and we are living a water crisis. So brings geospatial data along with climate environment information through the daily routines of the projects might be a way to get better benefits and more sustainable development of those projects, not only in implementation, but also on the operating. And another future area that should bring our attention is nanosatellites. We have been all hearing about the nanosatellite constellations that are going bring up in the future, maybe in 2024, 2025, each time come closer. And having that information on the same location 6 times per day, 7 times per day, it's something that we can imagine right now, but it might be a game changer on the implementation and operation of those energy projects, allowing us face those environment challenge and social challenge that we face during the implementation of a site. Thank you for your time. And
thank you, Daniel, for sharing your insights. I would now like to, we are already running a bit late, so I don't think we'll have time for many questions. But before we disperse, I would like to raise one final question to all the speakers. My question is regarding data sharing. So, we have been talking about collaborations throughout this session. So, what is the current for to solve a lot of these challenges associated with the energy transition? There needs to be a lot of geospatial data available in order to help decision making. So, how much is the importance of data sharing between the different energy sector stakeholders? What is the current state of collaboration? Martin, for instance, mentioned about data being a challenge. So, how can the data sharing be made better? So maybe Martin, you can go first.
Sure. Thanks, Ruben. And I think that's a very important but also difficult question. As I said, from our perspective, and mostly I talk about this Africa activities here, data is available in a very different quality. So we have a lot of global data sets, for example, for the PV generation, PV potential, for transmission line, for very central infrastructure, for power plants. So this is all available. I think there has been a very great progress in the geospatial community in the last years to generate this data, to make it available. This is all good. I think the biggest challenge is on this part to go more into detail. For example, to find the people that are currently not electrified yet, to determine the electricity demand of each settlement, and to go very into this detailed data to map distribution grid lines, transformers, this very detailed data. There is a huge challenge, and there's two solutions to that. I think one is technology. So we have more and more machine learning algorithms that tackle these problems, that try to combine available data to forecast this day, or to fill these data gaps, to kind of derive the data from other available data sets. And the second is collaboration with the countries directly, or with stakeholders in the countries. One is the energy ministries in the countries, or electrification agencies, or that value chain within the country, electricity companies, everybody who is kind of involved in the electricity sector here in the countries. but also companies such as microgrid providers, standalone system providers. So yeah, it's kind of bringing a lot of people on the table, seeing which data is available, and it's exciting to do such a task now in one of our projects. And I think we are learning a lot from this project.
Thank you, Martin. Elizabeth, would you like to go next? You mentioned about the traditional and non-traditional data sources. So maybe can you maybe enlighten us regarding what kind of data sharing arrangements can maybe help in better decision making?
Of course. So in the particular example of the Strava data, I spoke with Strava directly earlier this month or last month rather, with the GeoBusiness exhibition in London, where I'd also showcased this work around natural capital and net zero. And they said that they hadn't really thought about using the data in that kind of point of view before. Previously, they'd shared it with me via the Edinburgh City Council account, which was available because Edinburgh City Council are part of the planning process. I could only access what was contained within the Edinburgh Council area, so I couldn't, for example, compare it with another city or create a methodology that would process at national level. It was really quite limited. But in response to seeing what we did with the data, they're actually planning to share the entirety of that database with us so that we can put forward other tools. So it is about establishing that dialogue, making sure people are aware of what's possible, and then making it possible to share it in ways that fit with project timelines and fit with project budgets as well. I think for a really good example of data sharing that'll be one to watch for the energy transition will be NUAR, which is the National Underground Asset Register being prepared in England and Wales. Atkins is playing a part in that, but it's being run by the Geospatial Commission. And I think that will set a very important benchmark for data sharing in this area.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Daniel, would you like to provide your thoughts on this? You mentioned about the importance of public geospatial infrastructure. So maybe how can data sharing through a public geospatial infrastructure, how can that be beneficial in the energy transition ecosystem? So what kind of data sharing arrangements do you think can be possible? You're on mute, Daniel.
Sorry. Sure. So I think I will bring to the discussion the sharing of the government in investing those resources in the geospatial infrastructure development in order to give some product, to give some result back to the society. That result might be alert about the burning areas. That result might be alert about the vegetation growth, because through the distribution systems, the power lines, we have that problem with the necessity of cutting trees under the lines. So if you think about a small extension, that's okay. But when you start think about transmission lines with 2,000, 4,000 kilometers, you cannot enter in a car and go through all the transmission line, all the project to see where you must cut. So that has a high cost. So this collaboration between the government programs and the information that brings to the enterprise to use and get financial benefits from that on the operation, that might be a huge go-through that we must go.
Thank you, Naveen. And finally, Charlene, what would you like to say about this? So you mentioned about the collaboration strategies required for the energy sector. So in order to encourage data sharing between the different stakeholders of the energy ecosystem, what kind of collaboration strategies do you think will be required?
Yeah, so like everybody has already mentioned, I think collaboration is key. Also, usability of the data sets. Some of the data sets you can access information, but you can't actually drill down to a local scale where it's practical to use some of the data. A lot of the data sets also have particular advantages that they have several types of data that are available, such as, interconnection and, land-based data. It's very rare to find a database that's usable at all levels of prospect generation and planning and prospectivity to make the projects successful. So it's really important to collaborate to make sure that even international databases are usable on a local scale. So those are my takeaways. I've had a lot of access to geospatial data, but also to help people learn and make it easier for people to understand how to use the data. A lot of education is going to have to be involved in this energy transition, and that's going to be on a global scale to make the changes that we need to in a short amount of time. Like was mentioned, we're not going to meet that 1.5 degree target the way that we're going now. So it's a transition for all industries and everybody to collaborate on a much broader level, and even maybe to have global controls and standards to come through the data that's going to be shared in terms of data quality and such. So it's really important to keep all of that in mind. Thank you so much for today. This has been a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much, Charlene. So with this, we come to the end of our seminar. So I would like to thank all the speakers and all the participants for making this an insightful and engaging seminar. This seminar will actually help us project the value proposition of a collaborative workflow for geospatial knowledge, to identify the evolving roles of diverse stakeholders, and to explore new business and partnership models for collaborative innovation. This seminar was one of a series of 8 industry seminars to engage with the user industry and to build an understanding and consensus on the value proposition of geospatial knowledge for different sectors. The next seminar on collaborative workflow for geospatial knowledge in agriculture will be conducted on 20th January 2022. We will be sending out further details regarding the seminar in the coming weeks. We hope to see you all there. Thank you again to all the speakers and participants. Good night.